we have now had over 375 cloud camps around the world in over 100 cities, something like 50,000 people. And it's all volunteer driven with sponsorship help. So we've done quite a bit of cloud computing evangelism. And we'll talk more about that later at CloudCamp. But for today, for this afternoon, what we want to talk about is mobile. And the reason why we're talking about mobile in conjunction with CloudCamp is that it turns out some very interesting things are happening around mobile and cloud computing. I'm not going to steal any thunder here, so I'm going to go ahead and let our speakers talk, and then later I will give you some thoughts of my own. But as you can imagine, mobile is not inside your enterprise, so it's already outside, and there's a huge correlation with what's going on with the movement of enterprise and company data to the outside and mobile. So you can just understand there's a big correlation there, and I will let the speakers take over from there. Our agenda for today will be, we have John Dodge is going to be speaking first, and then I keep messing up his name, and I feel really bad about it. Sravish? I'm sorry, I'm going to have to learn how to say his name. But he's not here yet, but he's the founder of Kinvey, which is a very interesting mobile cloud company. I don't even think they'd use the word cloud, really. They're just a mobile back-end as a service company. So he will be speaking in about an hour. And then after that, we also have another speaker who's going to be talking about going into more detail about the Microsoft platform for mobile. You've all heard of Azure. But if you compare Azure to what is required to run a mobile application, Azure by itself doesn't do mobile the way that you would expect it to. It's more for applications. So they've spent some time in understanding what mobile is required, and they have released something that's specifically on Azure for mobile. So hearing the comparison of regular cloud infrastructure versus what a mobile infrastructure, I think, will be very helpful and useful. So after that, we will be done with our mobile workshop right around 5 o'clock, and we will move into CloudCamp, which officially starts at 6, but the networking will start around 5:30. So you have a little bit of break if you're going to stay for CloudCamp. You'll have a break to bio break, the important things, network, check your email, whatever. And then at 6 o'clock, we'll be starting up with lightning talks about various forms of cloud. And that is when I will share some of my thoughts about the state of cloud computing based on what we've been doing with all of the cloud camps and different companies we've been working with to educate the US and global community about cloud computing. But before we get started, does anybody have any questions about what we're going to do today, or I don't know, our agenda? Where the bathrooms are, or anything like that? We're good? All right, so I'd like to know a little bit about you, just for our speaker's sake, and my own curiosity. Find out a little bit about what your backgrounds are, because I know our agenda wasn't, really detailed about today. So finding out a little bit about you might help us put some specifics into our presentation. So how many of you consider yourselves to be on the, let's say, consulting side of cloud computing? Okay, so that's about 7 of you. Okay, how many of you would put yourself more in the, like, I'm a developer of some sort? Okay, got 1, 2, all right. And then how many of you you're a vendor of some sort? Like, you don't really do consulting, you're more of like a vendor of products. Okay, and there's about, okay. And then who's left? We've got maybe, what?
IT operations.
Okay. Okay, so you're actually doing real work. All right. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, and developers and IT people actually doing real work. Wow, all right. And are we missing anything else? Any let's see, PR people, marketing people? Okay, all right. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and invite John to come on up. John's going to start off with his presentation on BYOD, bring your own device, and cloud computing. So let me know if this works for you. Is that sounds good? Okay, great. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is. Sure. Go to Be Guest, and I was just told this, and I believe the login is visitor, and the password is Bentley. You know, a form will come up and make you sign your life away before you sign on. So, and if anybody wants this presentation, I have business cards. People use those anymore? I still do, but. So anyway, my background is newspapers and journalism, and we all know where that's at right now. Try to support a family on that. It was pretty good for most of my career, but I started out 33 years ago covering IT when it was called IS, and DP was a term, data processing. Remember, IBM had a data processing division, and they had two other big divisions, but they were just really old acronyms. So dial forward to today, and things have certainly changed many times over. So the enterprise CIO forms a community for CIOs and IT types, and where we come to discuss things like application modernization, information optimization, which is a fancy term for analytics and big data. We cover the cloud, we cover security, all the things that CIOs care about. Transformation, agility, what we call buzzronyms, just acronyms that are creating buzz at any given time. So I've been asked to speak on BYOD. I was originally asked to speak on the cloud, so I had a sort of a cloud primer ready to go, but at the last minute I changed it to talk about BYOD and what we're seeing and what CIOs are saying in our community, what they're blogging, the sum of their blogging, the sum of their comments. So hopefully you'll find this useful. I am heartened by there is one IT person in here, because that's who I've written for the last 30 years. So, I mean, that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of what really makes enterprises work. Okay. Well, BYOD is obviously driven by the cloud. It's all about access. All the surveys and what CIOs tell us that the chief motivation for going to the cloud is access. And that this whole notion that the cloud's going to lower cost is somewhat suspect. Some surveys have shown that it's really a wash by companies that have taken their CRM apps, their emails to the cloud. So it's hard to argue, though, with people talking about Google Office being $50 a seat versus Microsoft Office being $250 a seat. That seems like big savings there. But anyway, BYOD is enabled by the unbelievable access we have to an enterprise's data assets. And obviously it's fueled by the smartphone and tablet revolution. There was an article this morning, Globe, where IDC upped its projections for the number of tablets to be sold worldwide, and I think it was being up from 172 million to 190 million. So this whole sort of upward pressure on IT to allow you to bring your own device is only getting fiercer and fiercer. I mean, do you know a sales guy or a salesperson anymore who doesn't have a tablet? And I mentioned Fitbits, you know, this whole notion of Internet of Things, where just all manner of gadgets are Internet enabled. Fitbit is a little thing, it's a pedometer, and it has a chip in it called an accelerometer. It counts your steps, counts your calories, counts your distance. I love this little thing. It clips to your pocket, and it's very, very accurate. And then I just hit a button and it will upload to my personal Fitbit portal on my iPhone or my PC. But it's just so many devices are going to have some kind of internet capability, and sort of fuel this whole drive to bring your own device or bring your own anything. Telecommuting, that's a big deal. We've all read about Yahoo limiting those privileges. Now Best Buy is following suit. It must be a trait that struggling companies are the first to sort of insist that people come into the office. But the bring your own device revolution makes it possible for you to really work anywhere. And I don't want to get into the are you more productive at home or in the office? That's subject to a great debate. But BYOD is really enabling people to work from wherever. Is it creating chaos in IT? But I'd like to ask Robert over there at the table what he might think. I won't put you on the spot quite yet, but some organizations are saying no to BYOD, and I put "niet" there because a CTO from a company that was a contractor from the government says, "You do BYOD, you're fired." And I think you used the term "niet." So BYOD isn't catching on everywhere. And I asked a lot of CIOs, do you really allow people to bring their own device? And they all say yes, but, and you really wonder how many devices you really can tap into an enterprise's data assets that would sort of, where is the threshold where it's real bring your own device, or bring your own cloud, or bring your own apps. The BlackBerry 10 sort of a wild card. It's gotten good reviews. We've had stories, I say stories, or posts where people have unplugged their BlackBerry servers, but the BlackBerry 10 has gotten good reviews. There's a little bit of bounce in BlackBerry right now. Is it going to stem the tide of defections and the expense and the sort of IT overhead that the BlackBerry requires? Probably not, but I think it's just worth putting on the slide. Now, these slides actually do have titles. I don't know what happened to them, but anyway. Oh, they are showing up. Oh, yeah, BYOX. So this is the bring your own anything, and we get into the whole state of buzzronisms. Gartner says that app stores are going to be a key element of any BYOD policy, that you have to provide a certain number of apps, and usually they're iOS apps or their Android apps, because the smartphone is so key to the BYOD movement. I mentioned Google and SAP because they both have app stores. Actually, Google has these kiosks where you can get hardware, and you just go take the hardware, and then you sort of sign for it, and then sort of IT checks in with you later. It's sort of the reverse model. It's a push. Instead of you having to go to IT and ask for a new notebook or more memory or some kind of add-on device. SAP has started an app store, and you think of app stores, you think of Apple has 750,000 apps. I don't know, maybe it's 800, 900, it's going up astronomically, but the SAP app store has 120 apps. So when you're talking app stores, you're really talking extremes. You're talking about those 120 apps going to do, everything that SAP's employee population wants to do, and what's the trade-off? What are employees allowed to do if they use this app store? So those are all questions, but app stores are a big topic. This whole CIO is more fearful of bring your own cloud. The devices are not really as scary as, say, a marketing department going off and creating their own cloud, their cloud by credit card, going to Amazon or Google and signing up for some kind of database service and certain amount of storage in the cloud. It scared IBM so much that they banned Dropbox. And I think that was really significant. And obviously, Dropbox was being widely used within the company. And they just felt that it was a threat to the security of their data assets. Shadow IT and the CMO, we write constantly about how the CIO needs to court the chief marketing officer, because of where IT serves, the foundation of marketing now is technology. And I think Gartner predicted by 2017 that marketing would be spending more on information technology than IT. I don't know if I buy that. I mean, it's somewhat of a radical thought, but marketing is where They need to do things quickly, with speed. They need to be very opportunistic. And if they can sort of create their own IT infrastructure or their own IT application for a given marketing opportunity, they will do it. So I think there was just a study by Forrester that in Europe, 49, it was less than 50, half the CIOs had any kind of relationship with marketing or the chief marketing officer. So they really need to get up to speed on that, whereas 79% had a relationship with the CFO. I would have thought that would even be higher because to fund IT projects, you really have to go through finance. But I thought those were interesting statistics. Things to think about. I mean, we've got some CTOs at the Enterprise CIO Forum who have sort of have a laundry list as you formulate your BYOD policy. I mean, the first thing is security. We all know we're being hacked all the time. How many here know what the Mandiant report is? Yeah, the Mandiant report, it was very, very detailed about a unit of the People's Liberation Army in China. I think it was Unit 61398, and it detailed the hacking they have been doing, at least the hacking that they were able to ferret out. And they had penetrated the networks of 140 companies, mostly in English-speaking nations, stealing blueprints, partnership agreements, pricing lists, emails, you name it. They were on one network for as long as a year and 7 months, typically on networks, company networks, for 8 to 9 months. I don't even know if this stuff is to be believed, but it's pretty. It was pretty stunning, and they think that this unit 61398 was one of maybe 20 units that could have hundreds, if not thousands, of government workers hacking corporate and government websites. And I only hope we're just doing back. Anyway, security is just huge for any enterprise. It almost goes without saying, but we say it all the time. The hardware costs are shifted to the employee, but now there are studies saying that BYOD is more expensive, that it's costing companies money. And I think it was Gartner said, one analyst, they do sort of stand up and say the sky is falling and they scream for attention, but said that BYOD, this will be the year that BYOD will go away because it's too expensive. It's just causing, there's just so much expense associated with it that the CFO is going to say, no more of this, we're just going to stop. Be prepared to handle multiple contracts and invoices from carriers primarily because of smartphones and internet access for tablets. And there's this whole notion of mobile management expense, mobile expense management. I got the two words transposed there. You remember when 4G came out, there was all this story that workers were burning through their limits in 2 days, their monthly limits in 2 days, and these companies were getting gigantic phone bills. I mean, personally, we went from unlimited data from the two premier carriers, AT&T and Verizon Wireless, to now having these limit thresholds. So that has to be managed. I mean, don't pay $40 when a $20 plan will do. You have to monitor, you have to set something up, and there are vendors who have products that will monitor this stuff, so you don't let the costs run away. Weed out abusers. That was the advice from a CTO who blogged at our site, and those are the people who constantly exceed their limits and are coming in far above what they're allowed. So let me move to the next slide. Oh, yeah. So anyway, that's pretty much what I have to say about BYOD. I could talk, quite a bit more about it, but I do want to give a plug to the Enterprise CIO Forum. What we're about, I mentioned we're for the CIO and by the CIO. We're about the transformation, not of IT, but of the enterprise and how IT can play a big role in that. We're sponsored by Hewlett-Packard. We have 23,000 registered CIOs and IT types. you know, I'd be the first. You know, if you believe that we have 23,000 CIOs who actually carry that title, but we have a council. We have the CIO of Campbell Soup, CIO of Clorox, CIO of General Dynamics IT. We've got some real heavy hitters there. And we have communities, language-specific communities, obviously in English, Chinese, Japanese, and in German. We get about 150 to 200 comments a month on our blog posts, so we have these ongoing conversations where we're trying to engage CIOs, and we've even solved problems. There was a project manager from the Department of Homeland Security wanted to know how to set up a security policy, and she was sort of reading what the mandate was. Should it be set up? The Department of Homeland Security has many sub-agencies. Should they set up their own security policies, or should there be one overarching security policy for the whole Department of Homeland Security? We really helped her sort of work through this problem, and the 25 or so comments were part of the discussion at the Department of Homeland Security. I don't know what they ultimately decided, but that's when we feel like we're really doing our jobs. So I urge you to register. It takes about 2 seconds. You just have to put a name, rank, and serial number in and create a password, and come in and join the conversation about a lot of the topics that I've mentioned today. So with that, I'd be happy to open it up to questions. And yes?
Yeah, you know, looking at the BYOD issues, you know, I've really rejected the idea since it came up on being popular, mainly because it's a PC technology that's being applied to mobile, and it really creates more administrative work than problems that it solves. And when you look at you know, homogeneously going with Apple, which is a lot more secure, or if you look at the recent announcement of Knox by Samsung, it really narrows, you know, their potential field. And it seems like if you're going to go to address the problem of security on mobile, you should do it in a mobile way and not in a personal computer way.
Well, the PC is really locked down when it comes to mobile. I mean, it can be really well administered, secured. It can be shut off remotely when a device is lost. And you know, I don't know whether that's mobile management or if that's somehow PC management. I'm not sure the two are all that different. I mean, I know my company, which is IDG, I can't get to my Outlook on this. You know, I might be able to in a very clumsy way through a browser, but it's not worth doing. It's just much easier going on to where my company has installed Outlook on my MacBook. So, I mean, I sort of follow the path of least resistance, of where it's easier to use that application. So, I don't know, does anybody else, what's your question exactly?
My point is that BYOD is really an interim solution, or I think it is, and would love to see if you share the same opinion, that it's really an interim technology until the operating systems and apps get hardened. They're fairly there to consider sandbox on iOS. But then again, Android is a little bit like the Wild West at this point in time, especially with these older versions. But Samsung Knox solves the 95% of the problems, unless you're going to give the Android phone to the president or the CEO of some big bank. I mean, the 95%, Knox doesn't.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, how often do you hear about a phone or some corporate data asset being hacked? And corporations typically don't like to advertise this. I mean, security is an issue, and we know that corporate networks, in the traditional sense, are are being hacked. And there's something rare like the Mandiant report comes out and sort of details that hacking. And you know, a lot of this stuff just is not publicized, so we don't really understand what the security threat really is in, you know, sort of an aggregate sense across all enterprises. So I don't, you know, it just doesn't seem like the security threat is real public. And you know, we hear all the time about when you know, Amazon goes down and the Amazon Web Services go down. Well, Hootsuite goes down, Reddit goes down, entire companies go down. It's sort of hard to hide that. But you know, I thought what you might be driving at is the options are limited anyway. You know, the BYOD. I mean, you've got an Android environment, you've got an Apple environment, and you've got sort of Windows struggling to really get traction in the mobile marketplace. I thought maybe that's what you were driving at.
It kind of seems that the attributes of security become part of the operating system of the app because it becomes overload.
Yeah.
That, you know, makes a lot of money for good and MobileWire and all these, you know, 4 or 5 other competitors who are spending a lot on marketing.
I mean, one question is, you know, you've got 800,000, 750,000, you know, Apple apps. How many are really business focused, and how many do you want to coexist with on that device with the corporate data assets? I mean, I don't even know where the threat is there. Maybe it's innocuous, maybe it makes no difference, but obviously most people with their smartphones and their tablets have personal applications alongside business applications. But you know, so I sort of like to dig in a little more deeply on why IBM, which is, you know, I mean, leading the work at home movement, and but why it prohibited Dropbox. And I believe they said they'd come out with their own sort of Dropbox-like application. Maybe they have, but yes.
Well, I was going to ask you about when you say it's more expensive. What are you hearing as to why is it more expensive? But regarding IBM and Dropbox, probably not because it's the soft. It may not because the files are on the devices. It could more likely be the Dropbox cloud is, you know, pretty unprotected. But more what you hear, you know, why you said it.
Well, one was the emergence of 4G and no more unlimited data. And so a lot of big bills came in very fast. We haven't heard much about that since 4G debuted, you know, a year and a half ago. So I don't know, that subsided or it's under control. You know, I honestly don't know specifically what the cost items are. Obviously, companies have pulled back from buying employees' phones. They're either given a stipend or they're given nothing, and it's just worth it for them to pony up for their own phone and have what they want, so they can do, you know, so they can work wherever they want, and when they can, you know, do what they want with their phone. So, but I know that there are definitely studies out there that said BYOD can be as expensive compared to what, I'm not quite sure, or it's just a wash. It's just, you know, and then if it is more expensive, it's the CFO is going to start noticing, and they're going to say this has to stop. Yeah.
What have you seen on the compliance side? I mean, that's something that's huge. What are people doing for regulatory compliance, like Sarbanes-Oxley,
Well, if they're not telling me. I think that stuff's still pretty locked down. I mean, when you look at the cloud, the one app, or the two apps that they say that will be last to go to the cloud are ERP and financials. And I don't think the financial industry does a ton in the cloud. I mean, they can do their email in the cloud, they can do calendaring, they can do collaboration apps, but they can't really do anything that has to do with Sarbox or all the SEC regulations they have to comply with. It's just a long, long list. So I think for them to be in compliance, they're still pretty conservative when it comes to IT. And I covered that industry a couple years ago, and then that was the consensus. I mean, they're handling other people's money, and that's sort of serious stuff. ERP is interesting. I interviewed the CIO, supply chain CIO for GE Aviation, $18 billion maker of jet engines. And they didn't seem to be doing it. Her biggest issue was change management. I mean, that business, there was five operating companies within GE Aviation. I don't think she was thinking much about the cloud. I also interviewed a CIO at GE Intelligent Platforms, their industrial controls, and I said, you know, what do you have in the cloud? What don't you have in the cloud? And you know, there are certain standards they meet, more like ISO standards. And you know, he said, well, what isn't going to the cloud? Then he completely backed off the statement, and he said, you know, it won't even be 5 years before ERP goes to the cloud. I mean, when you have these huge enterprises that have to be in compliance, I mean, they're run in a very strict, conservative fashion, and they had 22 ERP systems because the company, that particular division, Intelligent Platforms, had grown up through acquisition. And it was driving them nuts, and they were in a 3-year program. They were toward the end of it to get that down to 2. And they got it down to 2, and 1 is really a knockoff of the first, except it has export control stuff in it because GE is a global company. So I think companies are pretty conservative. You know, I mean, I've been in the IT press since 1980, and you know, we're sort of always on the cutting edge, sometimes going down the wrong path. So the whole notion of BYOD, do companies really think about it? Yeah, I think they do, but I think what we're trying to get CIOs to think about is how they can really help the business and become an integral part of the business instead of IT being over here, sort of being set off somewhere. And that's really what they think about, where they can be strategic. Because, I mean, there's no such thing as an IT project. It's just that it's just a project, and information technology is just one element of it. So, other question, Dave? You were gonna?
Well, I was just gonna point out that at the large company mobile device management area, it might be a lot more problematic, but you've got, you know, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of small businesses that this is not a problem at all. It's a solution they didn't have in the first place. This is something that they didn't even have. So now they can do something that they didn't do before.
That's an excellent point. I mean, the Enterprise CIO Forum covers large enterprises. And I would think even a small and medium-sized business, 500 employees, would view the world much differently, and their IT world is, in many respects, simpler. And then you have small businesses that are one person to a handful of people, and yeah, I don't think they think about it in the same way. I also think they don't think about as much about compliance because there just aren't as many rules that apply to small businesses, non-public companies. So I would think they would be enabled, and you know, that the whole mobile phenomenon is just a huge plus. Yes, sir.
I'll add that one small way that BYOD is, you know, is a little niche is I've seen at least one example of a company providing software as a service to medical offices, medical doctor's offices, and wanting to have a 2-factor authentication in place and using personal cell phones for that. So it's an extension of the BYOD model. The office isn't going to buy mobile devices for all these users, but it's a great way to leverage something to help them make their business happen. So that's an interesting kind of small use of BYOD.
I find that physicians are the most backward when it comes to technology. That they, you know, there's no upside for them to invest in it. I mean, it's another space I've covered. That they just what do they get? They don't get paid for phone consultations. They don't get paid for using emails. So why be mobile why, consult with patients when they're not getting compensated, which is sort of an issue. I mean, there's a lot happening in telemedicine. I'm not, I've had some interactions with doctors in the last year. Finally, I found 2 that use email for the simplest questions, and they get back to me. I mean, they realize that there's just no stopping that. But I understand your point. It's just, for doctors to invest in electronic medical records, you have to now to get paid by Medicare, but there's still doctors who don't. But those doctors will generation themselves out, and certainly medical students in medical school now will have been homegrown on technology. So yes.
Imaging. So within the medical industry, you see a lot of UID imaging. So they'll give devices and things of that nature for MRIs, CAT scans, X-rays, and they can transfer that information out from device to device instead of having to bring over the actual copy. So you might have a doctor that's remote and is part of a bigger hospital. So something like an MRI at that hospital, but then they can just transfer from device to device. And a lot of times they use their own devices out there. So there's been a bit of a
Yeah, that's a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, I know I wrote about something 6 or 7 years ago where somebody had a heart test at Mass General, and then, he had it at a North Shore hospital that was part of the Mass General network. Got into Mass General, and he said, I just had this heart test, and they just made him take it over. And that was obviously just a small example of runaway healthcare costs. But, medicine is catching up. It's just, again, you got to get the physicians on board. You got to get the networks of physicians on board, and now they're wrestling with Obamacare, so they've sort of got their hands full. I mean, change comes at them through a fire hose, and ultimately it's patient care that really counts. So it's been sort of a far-reaching conversation. Anybody else? BYOD, going once?
What about, so, you're talking about BYOD, what about mobile device management, and is that the same thing? What have you heard about that?
Well, I mean, it's a sort of the standard stuff. There's plenty of products out there that do mobile device management. They'll wipe the hard disk mobilely if the device gets lost. They'll shut the machine down. They'll make it impossible for it, if it falls into the wrong hands, to be accessed. And I'm not a mobile device management expert, but that is sort of the essence of mobile device management. I'm sure there's much more to it, but you just don't want data and hard disks and notebooks to fall into the wrong hands. Particularly as that gentleman talked about compliance, when that hard disk might have medical records on it, and we do read about that happening quite a bit, where notebooks with medical records on it are lost or are stolen, but more often lost, where that puts a hospital or whoever owned those records. Really, the patient should own the record. Don't even get me going on that. But where a hospital who is responsible for the care of those records has huge exposure. So. Medical device management is still appealing to IT departments that want to make sure that records are not used surreptitiously. Cookies are kicking in. Anybody else? Well, thank you all. I have business cards if you'd like to know more about the Enterprise CIO Forum. And I hope you have a great afternoon and get a lot out of this. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Just a quick swap here. Yeah, I think so. I'm going to take over for a second here. Sorry for this delay here. I just got to do a quick transfer of a file.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is just take a moment to share with you a little bit about what's going on that could be very disruptive. You know, does anybody remember something called hailstorm? Does anybody remember that? Really? Nobody remembers hailstorm? Okay, well that makes sense. You don't remember. Yeah, kind of. So by way of background and introduction to this topic, what you're seeing here on the screen is actually from a Kinvey website or document. I'm not sure where I actually found the diagram, but I did a search for backend as a service. And I came up with this. And this is just kind of an indication that I wanted to hint at of what's going on. That there's this thing called backend as a service that's starting to take off. In fact, I think it's already taken off, and just a lot of us in the cloud space didn't see it coming. And the reason why we didn't see it coming is it started off really as a little niche product that kind of falls into the backend, or I'm sorry, into the platform as a service category, but it's really taken on a life of its own. But before I talk about this, because I think you should know about this, if you're interested in mobile, this could be extremely disruptive. But just before I get to this, I want to share with you. I've been running a web services user group. Just out of curiosity, how many years do you think I've been running a web services user group? How many years?
50.
What? Come on, realistically, how many years do you think it would make sense?
12.
Really? 6. Okay, 6 years, 12 years, 50 years. Not even 50 years old. Oh, maybe it shows. I don't know. Yeah, running that web services user really put some years on me. I can tell you. 12 years, actually. I've been running for 12 years. I started, it's a good guess. I started it in 2000. I proposed it in 2000 and started running a web services user group in 2001. I was prompted by Microsoft and IBM's joint work on something called SOAP. And SOAP had been around, had kind of been in the works for a while, but they had made this announcement in late 2000 that they were both going to be pushing forth this standard. And I'd been doing a lot of back-end integration work. I was very early to the .com. I had been doing a lot of consulting work, and of course, a lot of those were e-commerce sites. And my main shtick was that I knew how to do all the e-commerce back-end stuff. And there was no real standard way of doing that. Everyone had their own sort of name-value pair kind of way of doing it. There was all these arguments over whether you're going to use Java versus Microsoft technologies and or other ways. And there was always these big battles, and something like SOAP, which basically said, well, we're going to propose this unified way of communicating. Doesn't matter what programming language you have on each side. It made a lot of sense to me. So I started this user group. Anyway, it wasn't very long after that Microsoft proposed this this set of APIs on the web. We didn't have the term cloud back then, called Hailstorm. And the number one piece of this was identity. So the idea was that if you wanted to track your customers' information from one website to another, you could store the user credentials in this thing called Hailstorm. Now, Hailstorm did a whole bunch of other stuff too. How many of you, I mean, we're in this cloud space here, how many of you remember UDDI? Okay, all right. So you could kind of think about the early days of web services as with Microsoft and IBM kind of in cahoots with oh gosh, who was the third company? It was big ERP company or something like that. Anyway, eventually it was SAP, and I forget who the other company was before that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this was a huge play by Microsoft to basically become the identity management for every user on the web. And because of that, it was just so aggressive, everyone just recoiled. It was like, whoa, wait a minute. Look, right, especially at that point in time when everyone was really upset with Microsoft for being so monopolistic. Remember what's going on back then, all the lawsuits and all that kind of stuff. So having Microsoft propose something like this was just extremely aggressive, and it seemed innocuous, but it was pretty quick. You could pretty quickly see what was going on. That if you could own the user's information, it's pretty hard to pry that out from whoever's managing that. Okay, so that's the background for this. Is that the entire, and when I say the entire, like literally, like everybody else was upset and did not want Microsoft to own user identity across the web. Now, fast forward. Okay, so that kind of blew up and didn't go anywhere. It was just too hot of a topic for Microsoft, and or anybody really. Fast forward, and cloud computing comes around. Now, cloud computing is, it's a platform. It's where you put your code and you run your own database and you manage your own users' information. Pretty comfortable, right? It's not that big of a deal. Now, there's platform as a service products out there like Salesforce, which is they're going to do everything for you. And by the way, Force.com, how many of you are familiar with Force.com? Please raise your hands. Okay. All right. So Force.com is a very nice product. If you are starting from scratch and you want to build an application that targets Salesforce-type customers, it's a very nice product. But it's very proprietary. It's its own programming language. It can't run anywhere else. And if they don't offer the features that you need, you just don't have any other option. You have to spin up an instance of some virtual machine, some other cloud, and do that there. And then you kind of lose the benefit of using Force.com. So here you have another scenario where you've got lock-in potential around a platform as a service. And while I would say that Force.com is successful, how many of you know that they acquired Heroku? Okay, well, they acquired Heroku because Heroku had a much more open model, supports a programming language called Ruby and Ruby on Rails, which can run in other places. So you're not truly locked in. And now they support other programming languages too. So it's less lock-in. Let's just put it that way. And they're actually probably one of the top two in number of developers using the platform. So a very successful platform. Anyway, so you've got user data. That's one way of locking in. And you've got the platform. There's another way of locking in. And so Salesforce was not as successful as they could have been, even though Salesforce launched at the same time as Amazon EC2. Same year. Both launched. I was a beta developer in both of them in 2006. But EC2 would be more like the equivalent of Netscape Navigator, where you can display any web page, versus Salesforce is kind of like the AOL. You can build things, but it's got to be inside of their system. Okay, so why am I telling you all this backstory? I thought that there was so much push away from having this kind of lock-in that we weren't going to see that happen. And along comes mobile, and along comes back-end as a service. And they start really simple. Hey, you've got an application, and it mostly runs on the phone. And it might be a game or some other thing. Maybe it's brochures, maybe it's directions or catalog product information. So it's information. And there's not a lot of personal user data there. So you can run the entire thing basically as a download onto your phone, right? Games, all this kind of stuff. There's no need to talk to a server, really, other than just to download the app. So that's where a lot of mobile apps got started. It was really simple. It was almost kind of like replacing the PDF or replacing the, the ebook. It's like put it as an app. And now you've established a relationship with that user in some way, shape, or form, right? So now you can update more easily that content rather than forcing them to go download the PDF again. So it was a nice start. However, more and more app developers wanted to have a little bit of a relationship with the user, right? So they wanted to be able to have the user log in, maybe save a photo, an avatar or something, or tell them where they live so they can do some, maybe just simply like the zip code, so they can do some sort of location-based service. And they can, so how would you do that? Well, you'd have to go set up your own server up on, name your cloud. You'd have to set up a database. You'd have to figure out a way to create accounts. So you have to go and do all of this yourself, which doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But have you seen what these young developers look like these days? Okay, they like things that are easy. The developer of today, the new folks out there, which by the way, by looking at our average age, is not in this room, okay, they are very different than us. They grew up texting, not email. They don't know what a landline looks like. Okay? They're very different than us. So for them, convenience and getting to eye candy fast is really important. So the fact that there's a service out there that lets them save user information is exciting. They don't have to set that up themselves. They can focus on the flashy stuff that they like doing, iFart or whatever the application is. And then, somebody wants to save their own personalized fart, great, okay. They have some way of storing that and sharing it, okay. I don't know if that was the app, but all I'm trying to point out here is that somehow these back-end as a service solutions have grown from that. And they are now storing very successfully application developers, users, in whatever format they created. The backend as a service, these guys are growing fast, they're building, they're not thinking about open standards, why would they? They're thinking about adding new features, getting new customers. So my point is that this is going to be disruptive. They are owning the storage of user identity. And they're doing it fast. They're growing in leaps and bounds. And most of us in the cloud computing industry don't see that. This is completely under the radar. And so that thing that everyone was up in arms about is happening. It's just not Microsoft. It's startups. By the way, Microsoft, I'm sure, will buy one of them. So I just want to point this out. It's happening. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's great that the application developers get to build applications faster, especially the these kind of social app developers doing all sorts of funny things. The ecosystem is growing out. You can see there's platforms. This is the kind of the overall sort of maybe cloud ecosystem with back-end as a service conveniently right in the middle, which Kinvey would of course like to do that. But there's a lot going on, and identity is now a service being offered in the cloud very successfully and growing very fast. So who are these companies? Well, I just quickly grabbed some logos. This is by no means representative of everybody. This is just the ones I could grab quickly off my laptop here. But we're gonna have the founder of Kinvey speak in a minute. We had a CloudCamp at StackMob headquarters in San Francisco. I don't know Feed Henry personally. I haven't ever used any of their stuff, but I just love the name. I think that's a really funny name for a company. Parse is very successful. Urban Airship raised a bunch of money. They kind of start off just simply doing, when you sign up for an app on your phone and it says this company would like to communicate with you. Okay, they'd like to be able to do push notifications. They kind of start off in that area. Apogee is an interesting company. They traditionally were an API company. They provide tools that help you provision to your APIs to developers. And I think they saw that identity was coming along, and that was an opportunity. So they bought a company called UserGrid, which is actually open source, but they really don't promote that much. It's Apogee offers it as a service. So these are just a few of the companies. Microsoft with Windows Azure Mobile Services, as I mentioned before, they see this as an important area. And yet, here are all the rest of us, working away, building our apps, doing everything ourselves, open source, whatever. These guys aren't open source. And they're gathering lots and lots of power through user data. So I just thought I'd share that with you and then ask you if have any of you worked with any of these guys? Have any of you worked? How many of you knew about the term backend as a service before hearing about the workshop today? Okay. You're not raising your hand. Okay. Okay, so about a little over half of you. So hopefully for the rest of you, something new to think about. For those of you who raised your hands, what do you think of it? Have you used it? Have you thought about it? Was it just sort of a passing fancy? Yes?
Some that are missing on your screen there are more focused on the enterprise side.
Sure.
Most of these, I think, are not so much about enterprise backend integration and mobilizing enterprise data.
Yeah, I'm blanking. There's one in particular that raised a bunch of money like a year ago, and I forgot what it's called. I think I want to say they're out of the South or something. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Any presence? Any presence?
That wasn't the one I was thinking of, but that's what's that?
Coney?
Coney, that was the one. Yeah.
Coney is a MEP.
What's that?
Coney is in the MEP category.
What is the MEP category?
Mobile Enterprise Application Platform. They're an on-prem solution where they force you to use their SDK as well.
Right.
Whereas the BaaS providers let you use any SDK.
Right. So what he's basically saying is it's kind of a closed solution, and you kind of use their tools to build the application.
Yep.
Yeah, and it runs on their platform. So you're kind of, it's like a closed enterprise solution, but they're actually doing quite well, I think. Yeah. So they raised it last year. I remember seeing I forget what the number was, but it was like a huge number, and I've never even heard of this company. What is going on? So that's when I started looking into this backend as a service, and it's just been exploding. So so we're missing some of the enterprise ones. Yeah.
I'd also add that in parallel to having companies provide user identity stores, there's a pretty healthy movement for federated identity. Facebook, for example, is used to log into a lot of sites.
Right.
You can just tap an existing identity that the user has. It's not just in the social space with Facebook or Google or whatnot. You can also federate with an on-prem Active Directory, for example, in a fairly secure and non-intrusive way to cloud applications.
That's right. I did some work. Actually, you mentioned. Did you mention Ping Identity for some? Okay, yeah, I've done some work with Ping Identity, and that is a very interesting solution because they traditionally. How many of you have heard of Ping Identity? Okay, good number of you. So traditionally, they are a on-prem appliance that you give access to your Active Directory or LDAP, and then it provides the authentication to your applications throughout your company. So, yeah, it's single sign-on, right? So, for those of you who don't know the concept, specifically how it works is you log into your PC at work or your laptop, whatever it is that is on the network. So when you log in, Active Directory or LDAP knows that you're logged in. But the idea is to not have people keep putting in passwords all the time because that's not that secure. You got to remember the passwords. People tend to use the same password over and over again. Once you lose the password, or I'm sorry, once it gets compromised, now they have access to all of the other websites where you use that password, and you're not changing your password all the time because you have to go change it everywhere. So what happens is something like Ping Federate, I think is the name of the product, provides the integration between the applications and Active Directory in a way that is sort of simple for enterprises to do, so that when you go to the website, the web application, you don't even log in. It just automatically knows by the credentials that are being passed in over the network from your computer, which computer you're on and what your the network credentials are passed through. It then takes those, passes those through to Ping Federate. Ping Federate goes and looks into Active Directory, says, is this person currently logged in from that machine? If they are, then we know they're them. We're not going to ask them for a password. We're just going to let them right in, right? And the application doesn't have to really be network aware for that to happen. Now what we're seeing is that's actually available out on the public internet. So if your company is using software as a service, let's say it's using, I don't know, like Right Now or one of these other SaaS applications, the same problem happens, right? You got passwords everywhere. And if you're like most people, you don't change your passwords that often because you'd have to change it everywhere, or you'd have to remember which ones you didn't change. It's kind of a nightmare. So a lot of people just have 3 or 4 passwords, and for different levels of security. And so, but if one of those were to get compromised, then all the other places that password is used is compromised. So we're using the example of Ping. They're offering Ping 1, which is a software as a service version of Ping Federate, and you let Ping 1 in through your firewall into your Active Directory, and then when your customers, when your employees go to that SaaS application, they're passed in some credentials based on a start page that you have specifically for your employees. And when they click on that link, it passes in some information. That information is securely passed back through Ping 1, back down to verify that the user is actually logged in, and they get right into the software as a service solution without having to pass in their password. So it's nice and secure. And for those of you who are worried about security, what is the #1 way your company is going to lose your data? Loss of passwords, right? Believe me, I've been doing this. That's the #1 way in which people are losing data, is they're accidentally going to a website that they think is PayPal or your bank, and it's not, and you think you're logging in and you pass in your password. Now they have your password, and then they redirect you to the place that you think you were logging in, and you log in again, thinking you might have mistyped something the first time. You type it in correctly again, and now you get in and you think, oh, okay, everything's fine. You didn't even know that you just gave away your password to all of your banks. So that's why this is such an important thing, and identity is a very big deal. And so even though the back-end as a service companies are primarily focused on consumer applications, it's really interesting, it's fascinating that this is happening, because it was such a big deal not so long ago not to have a company kind of contain all of this stuff. So it's very interesting. Maybe it is that Facebook and Gmail and LinkedIn and Twitter are kind of doing it, so now we're kind of accepting this as a model that some company is going to act as our authority. Maybe we're realizing that having your information all over the place in all these different formats isn't such a great idea. So maybe it's just the maturity of the industry, but it's happening. And every time I go to a CloudCamp or other cloud event, I mention this, and it's like half the room has no clue. So I just wanted to share this with you, and if you have any more thoughts, we can continue. Otherwise, we can also move on to our next presenter. So yes?
Are you almost suggesting, it's an interesting perspective, are you almost suggesting that the competitive landscape is ultimately for owning and managing identity at the end of the day?
Well, yeah. I do believe that. I guess what I'm trying to point out here is that
versus owning the data or owning the APIs.
Well, the data is obviously very important. I think, but yeah, what I am simply trying to point out here is that owning the right, so owning the identity or to store the profile information for application developers is incredibly important and valuable. And the companies who do that have a real chance of becoming the dominant platforms. So, like, I don't even know. I haven't looked into what the back end of the service, like how much money they've been raising, what valuations or anything like that. But whatever they're getting, I think it's worth it, because I think they're in an incredibly solid position as long as they keep getting more developers and more applications. So, yeah. Any other thoughts before we move on here?
Some of these companies have enormous revenue streams, like Urban Airship. I'm just wondering what you think their secret success there was. Was it being in the right place at the right time in their case, or having the scale, or having the unique position perhaps that they carved out early?
My personal opinion is that, this is just my opinion, I remember when they used to demo at some of our meetups in Silicon Valley, and I thought it's kind of curious, oh, that's interesting. And then I went to go build a mobile app, and I was like, how do I do that? Mentally, it's a very different paradigm to push information to a phone than what you might be normally used to doing. And so to have somebody provide that for you, and it's incredibly important, because you're now establishing a relationship with them that now you can track people wherever they go, and having location information is very valuable. So incredibly valuable service, hard to do the first time. A very simple service actually once you set it up. I mean, it's almost like a no-brainer, awesome idea. And I don't think a lot of people figured it out early, and they did. So they've been very successful at it. I see there's a whole bunch of startups in this space now. I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, getting frothy, but again, I don't really know what the valuations are. But if you're getting customers, you're getting developers, and they're paying, I think you can value yourself however you want. Yeah.
With these different services, what degree is somebody who uses them? How easy is it to move to a different service, and how easy is it for them to get their users' information out in a way that they can put somewhere else?
My guess is it's really not easy. Have you ever tried moving your meetup group from meetup.com? It's impossible.
Everybody has to stay at server.
Yeah.
Everybody has to sort of move individually.
Your phone is authenticated to that API. I mean, how do you change that? Now, you can push a new app, and maybe that's all you do, but you still got to move the data. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying it would have been wrong 8 years ago. It would have been a big, whoa, hey, what's going on here? But I think what's interesting now is that the consumer either doesn't know, which is probably the case most of the time. The application developer probably knows, but is just saying, the value is so great, I'd rather just go ahead and do this. And I think that's what's happening. And I think that's the interesting thing in the shift in the kind of cloud ecosystem is that the value of open has a value, but it can be there can be other things that have more value. And I think that's what we're seeing. And it's I still don't know what to think about. I'm standing up here rambling a little bit right now because I still think it's I'm trying to get my head around the kind of the future that this is going to bring for us. Yeah.
Sort of the order of magnitude issue, isn't it, too? You're thinking Google with a bunch of extra zeros, in the consumer market compared to the enterprise market. An enterprise play can't. Well, tell me, do you think an enterprise play can compete with consumers in terms of pricing?
I mean, that's it's a different point, but a parallel point, right? Because it's a matter of sheer numbers, really. If you can provide a service that provides just enough where folks are willing to give up something that they normally wouldn't have given up, I can see enterprises doing the same thing. Why wouldn't a small or medium-sized enterprise give up the identity management of their own employees if they can get enough value right? I mean, everything has its own sort of breaking point, and I think managing of your own employee data probably has a price. It just depends on what that is. Oops, I'm sorry. I was having this conversation with the folks at Ping Identity about this. I had Pam. I forget Pam's last name actually, but she's she's in the. She reports to the CEO. She's one of the strategic thinkers at Ping Identity. And we were talking about how the internet itself might start to congeal around enterprise and consumer because of the different requirements. It might be someday when you log in, and this is I don't know if you remember this stuff. I'm just looking at the gray and the balding out there, and I know you're in my age group, but I don't know if you remember when there was that concept around Windows. When you logged in, it would automatically log you into Windows Live, or what I can't remember what it was called back then. But that was one of the features, that you would automatically be logged into the internet. When you logged in, this is probably like 2004 or something. I don't remember exactly. I think it was Passport. Yeah, Passport. It was a little bit ridiculous because I remember watching, I don't know, some show, and they were talking about the most visited sites on the internet. Passport was number 2, and I was like, that's bullshit. That's ridiculous. Somehow they were using it, but like we didn't know we were using it, right? So, but yeah, you log into your desktop, you're automatically logged into the internet. Okay, well, what are you really logged into? You're logged into the services that Microsoft is connected to, and the partners and all that kind of thing. Well, I'm just saying, like, I'm seeing this whole hailstorm thing coming back, and I'm thinking that we're actually going to accept it this time. And we're going to accept it because it grows up slowly from small players who don't threaten us today. And maybe, I don't know, I mean, who knows if we'll ever be really threatened, but I think we're giving up that. I think we are finally to the point now where we are ready to give up the management of our identity to a cloud provider of some sort. And on the enterprise, I'm seeing the same thing, because you've got Ping Identity out there is doing this today. Okay, they're getting software as a service companies to integrate with them, so that as an enterprise, I just simply integrate with Ping One. And now all of the software as a service companies that they're integrated with, I now can access without having to enter a password. Okay, and they have this, it's very nice. I wish I had a screenshot of it for you. I don't, but they have a very nice little browser page you go to that your administrators can manage, and it has nice, like, Web 2.0-y looking buttons, and those are all the software as a service websites that your company has allowed for you specific user. And you go to that, and guess what that looks like? That looks like your start button from Windows. So now you're starting to see a web page that looks like a Windows start page. Okay? And that's web, that's internet, that's identity on the cloud. That is now, you are logging in to your enterprise cloud. Okay, so Ping is doing this. I'm sure there's other companies. I'm sure Salesforce wants to be that same thing, so they're probably doing it too. I really need to get off the mic here because I gotta move on, but I'm going to leave you with that I think we are actually seeing the beginning of the end. All right. So, I'm over time here. Sravish, please tell me how to say your name correctly. Sravish. Am I saying that right?
Sravish with an S in front.
Sravish. Okay, thank you. I hadn't heard that name before, so it threw me. So, coming up here next. Okay, so Sravish is the founder of one of these companies who's going to take over our consumer. Now, do you have an adapter? You want to put it on here? Because I don't have that kind of adapter. Okay. All right. So, let me go ahead and switch here. So we're going to take a moment break while we get Sravish set up. So we had Intel today. well. Heard a lot about you. You guys are making waves. How long is your presentation going to go?
20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Okay, folks. Sravish. Oh, you need to get an after. Oh.
Back in as a service?
No pun intended, of course.
There it is.
Actually, this is the professional version of my screen, but when I'm working, this is what it's. I normally start my presentations with a couple of back-end jokes, but Dave has asked me to keep it really clean today.
Go back.
But he made a couple of fart jokes, and I think I'm happy. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Cool. All right, my name is Sravish Sridhar. I'm the founder and CEO of Kinvey. I see a few friendly faces here. Gordon Half, everybody from Red Hat, who probably knows more about cloud than all of us put together here in this room. Gordon and I had the privilege of working together in the early stages of Red Hat Cloud. And I'm really scared about some of the questions Gordon's going to ask me at the end of this presentation. I'm here to talk to you about backend as a service, a concept that Dave introduced you to in some publications. It's also called the mobile cloud. And I'm just going to take you back to a couple of years ago. So this is mid to late 2010 when I started building mobile applications for myself along with a few friends. And I quickly found myself asking a lot of typical questions that developers, both that are building B2C applications, as well as developers within the enterprise that are building apps today, start to ask themselves. Where is this app going to run? Is it going to run on an iOS device? Is it going to run on an Android device? Is it going to run on a tablet? Or is it going to run on the mobile web? Is it going to be an HTML5 website that's going to render in a mobile and tablet-friendly fashion? How am I going to connect to various services? How am I going to ensure security? How am I going to manage user identity? And what started off as a project, a personal project of mine where I wanted to solve my wife's problem. And her biggest problem was she and I couldn't stay in sync together. We had a lot of conflict in the house. She would write things on a piece of paper on my refrigerator and say, you have to go pick up the dry cleaning today, or you have to go pick up the kids tomorrow. And of course, I would always miss reading the stuff on the refrigerator. And I was on Outlook, and in fact, when I was in Red Hat, I was on Zimbra. She was on Gmail, so our calendars never were able to work together. And so I said, I'm going to write a mobile app for myself and for my wife so that she can make updates on her phone, and those updates will show up on my phone. You know, simple enough. And then I slowly started getting into this journey about I have to stand up a database, and I have to get identity working, and am I going to live on the cloud? If so, which cloud? And how am I going to work online and offline? How am I going to keep all this secure? And very soon, what started becoming a side project became a company where I thought I would need 5 to 10 people and a couple of $1 million in funding to go build. And I started talking to a few friends about this in Boston and in New York about building mobile applications and what kind of apps were they building. And I started to see the same trend that Dave started talking about, which is mobile applications started moving from purely client-side applications like Angry Birds, which was hugely successful. But if you upgrade your phone, you have to start from level 1 on Angry Birds again, even if you'd reached level 20, because Angry Birds doesn't sync your scores with a backend. It doesn't have a notion of identity. It's a purely client-side application. But people started moving from building client-side apps to apps that were connecting to back-end systems. So I asked them, how are you guys doing this? And the question that I got was very interesting. They said, well, we're going to go first pick a cloud provider, right? And at the time, there were quite a few of them. So there was a decision-making process on which cloud do I pick. And once you pick the cloud provider, even though clouds say that they're open, there are things like OpenStack, and there's OpenShift from Red Hat, and the various standards that are emerging, there is lock-in at the cloud layer. Once you've deployed your application on a particular cloud infrastructure and it's in production, there's a tremendous cost to move from one to the other. So people spend a lot of time making this decision. Which cloud do I run on? And once I run on the cloud, I have to set up a database and then figure out how I'm going to connect to various APIs for my application. Because Facebook's API is different, and it changes almost every month. So if the API changes, you have to update your app, otherwise your app stops working. Twitter, on a whim, will cancel API access if they don't like what you're doing. Google Places starts to charge all of a sudden. Twilio changes their API all the time. And then heavens forbid, if you're building an application that not only connects to all these cloud services, but if you're building an application that's going to connect to your internal systems, your databases, your SOAP APIs, your LDAP systems, how are you going to mobilize these systems that have been custom built from scratch for the web use case? There's a tight coupling between the web layer, the SOAP layer, the identity layer, and the backend system that sits behind it, the database. How are you going to build mobile-friendly SDKs when you don't have the talent or the skills to do it because it's brand new technology? Where are you going to source all this technology from? And then even if you had the talent and if you're able to do this, you would then have to install and configure the system, design your entire architecture, code and test it, manage and figure out all the security and life cycle management, backup, scalability, and manage all your data. And this is just for one application. Right? That's why I realized, I was like, damn, I have to go raise money to go build a simple application to solve a problem that my wife and I have every day. And I saw some of you smiling, and I think that some of you have the same problem too. By the way, for the record, it's a problem that still hasn't been solved. So the good news is Kinvey's backend can cut your costs in half for that problem. So if any of you want to solve it, I'm looking to invest in that company. Most developers I spoke to had one common theme. When they started to think about the mobile applications they wanted to build, they said building and operating a backend sucks. And the aha moment for me was, and I think Dave touched on this a little bit, the aha moment for me was Facebook is Facebook because they're the largest hub for social data on the planet today. Salesforce is Salesforce because they're the largest hub for CRM. Google is Google because it's the largest hub for search. There's no company today that can truthfully claim that they're the largest hub for mobile in the world. And I got excited because I thought that was a massive opportunity. With the proliferation of mobile devices across platforms, if you can build a cloud-based backend system that people can use to build mobile applications with, and you can become the largest such provider, it's a huge opportunity to go after. And so I put a team together, and very quickly I started to ask myself, what are we going to call this thing? I mean, I had a name for the company, Kinvey, but I had to come up with a category because cloud is such a frothy space that we're not doing infrastructure as a service, because infrastructure as a service is solving the problem of a system administrator who's trying to procure hardware. You're giving them hardware as a service. We're not doing platform as a service because platform as a service is inherently solving the DevOps problem. You write a backend, you write a piece of business logic, you deploy it. The SLA that a platform as a service gives you is this: we're going to scale it for you, and we're going to make sure that it runs against a certain SLA, solving the DevOps issue. But what I'm trying to solve is providing data of different kinds, identity, social, location, enterprise systems. I'm providing data down to a mobile application. What do I call this? I don't want to call it data as a service because it's not factual. And so I started scribbling down some names. And I was sitting at the room with my VP of engineering, and this was in May of 2011, and I gave him 3 options. I said, really quick, read the 3 things that I like, my top 3 choices, tell me what you like. And he said, back into the service. So the juvenile teenagers that we were a couple of years ago, we scribbled the phrase, we put the bass in badass because we thought we were doing some badass stuff. And we had a category. And so simply put, back into the service is a platform that gives you all the back-end features that you want, no matter what it is, down to the libraries. And here's what I mean by that. When you're a developer, whether you're building a B2C application or you're building an enterprise B2E application, a business-to-employee application, you're trying to harness data from various sources. In some cases, it's social and location. In some cases, it's in-app purchases. In some cases, it's an Oracle database or a JBoss middleware infrastructure or a WebLogic middleware infrastructure. In the same way, you're trying to connect your identity, your user's identity, either to an OAuth provider or an LDAP provider or an Active Directory provider or ping identity. But the key is, when you're building a mobile application, you're building this application across devices. Your app is going to run on iOS and Android, eventually on HTML5 and so on. And you want a standardized mechanism to connect to all these backend services. So in the world of mobile, it's no longer about the API. You talk to any mobile developer who's building production quality applications. In the world of mobile, the library is the new API abstraction layer. And they want a consistent way to manage data that's flowing through the application, and all the best-of-breed providers today in the back end of the service space, as well as companies like Google or Urban Airship or Twilio, are not giving you APIs. They're giving you SDKs. The library becomes the new abstraction layer. So as you're thinking about your mobile strategy and how you're going to connect data and identity that sits inside the enterprise, my suggestion is for you not to think about how you're going to put a RESTful interface in front of it, which is your first instinct. But the question you should try to answer is how you're going to build a mobile SDK for your backend systems. Because that's what's going to give you the power to build mobile applications easily. Why? And the why is, just like you don't want to do things again and again and again in the back end, building and operating a backend sucks. Your client-side developer doesn't want to do the same thing again and again and again on the front end. They don't want to do online, offline data caching. They don't want to do network management. They don't want to do battery management. They don't want to try to figure out, how do I move data and store it on a device? Do I use a SQL store on iOS? Do I use local file storage? There's a tremendous amount of complexity on the client side now. And so the libraries become, or the mobile SDK becomes the abstraction layer that takes care of all this work for the mobile developer. And so from an architecture perspective, I'm kind of giving you what Kinvey's architecture looks like, but this is pretty much common for, and I've talked to most of the CEOs in the back end of the service space, this is pretty much common for almost everyone. We start with the application, and we want the client-side developer to focus primarily on building the app. But from a back-end perspective, there are a bunch of common building blocks that every back-end as a service provider gives you. So things like a data store, and we support both NoSQL databases as well as SQL databases. So you get a data store out of the box. You get a file store out of the box. Because of the fact that you're building mobile and tablet applications, you're not going to take photos, you're going to take videos. So you need a CDN and an image store or file store that sits in front of behind the CDN. So you get a CDN out of the box. You don't have to go purchase one and manage it. You get basic authentication capabilities, and you get analytics. Every API call that is made by the mobile application is tracked, and user identity is associated with the API call. And so now you have in-depth analytics about what your mobile application is doing and what every end user is doing. And since it's cloud-based, you have monitoring and you have backup and you have reliability all built in. And that entire piece is your cloud service. And various back-end as a service providers integrate with various mobile-specific features. Dave mentioned Urban Airship. We decided we don't want to build push from scratch, so we integrated with Urban Airship. But other back-end as a service providers have built their own push notification service from scratch. We integrate with various location providers so that you don't have to worry about which one to integrate with. And similarly, Facebook and Twitter and so on. But the key is all these back-end systems and all these back-end features are abstracted away for the mobile developer and delivered through client libraries. And the client libraries take care of security on the device, network management, online, offline data caching and data sync, as well as user management. And so the mobile developer doesn't have to build this again and again and again. And once all this is wired up, the developer now has all these back-end features as a self-service platform. We don't do any consulting. We've built this platform to the point where a developer can come in, create an account today. In fact, everyone in the room that's on a tablet or on a laptop can go to Kinvey.com or to Parse.com or to StackMob.com, register for an account, and stand up your backend immediately. It's completely self-service. And one of the trends we are seeing, and like Dave mentioned, for the last year or so, for the first year of our journey, we were primarily B2C focused. We were only focused on developers that were building games, content management apps like Instagram, clones, and so on. But in the last year, we've got a lot of enterprises using Kinvey for production applications, both for their B2C use cases as well as for their B2E use cases. And we're trying to coin this term, and we're testing it out in the market right now. And the trend we're seeing in the enterprise is we're calling it the developerization of IT. All of you have heard of the consumerization of IT because you're trying to, most of you have laptops and you're trying to get your enterprises to standardize on iPads and tablets because you love how powerful that device is. Developerization of IT is developers in your company using services like Kinvey or like Heroku or like OpenShift. It's really easy to use, and they're bringing these technologies into the enterprise. So our foray into enterprises, companies like Johnson & Johnson, Aetna, Vibram Shoes, Bayer, Pfizer, et cetera, are all Kinvey customers. Our foray into enterprises have been developers who've used our public.com service contacting us and saying, my company is building a mobile application for our internal needs, can you guys help? And that's how we've expanded into the enterprise market. And right now, most of our revenue comes from enterprises. But the power is it's completely self-service. And the reason that is important is most enterprises today only have a small team of people in-house that can build mobile applications. A majority of mobile development in an enterprise is outsourced. You're finding a local dev shop or one of your larger SI partners who are building the apps for you. But you don't want to make the same mistake that a lot of enterprises made when Dave started his API workshop 12 years ago. Because in 2001, I wrote my first SOAP API. That was my answer. And the reason I wrote it for my last startup was we wanted a standard interface for our internal folks to use our platform and also our outsourced folks in India to use our platform. And you want to have that same capability in your mobile strategy as well, because you have a blended model for your mobile development, and you want your developers, outsourced or in-house, to use the same abstractions and the same libraries to build the same consistent type of application. People didn't do that in the early 2000s, and they spent millions of dollars in the mid-2000s moving to SOA. And what we're saying is you shouldn't make that mistake all over again. Right? And so once you have a self-service platform, then the question becomes, everything in blue is the back end of the service stack, so you get the whole thing out of the box. But the key piece in the enterprise is, all this is great. This works wonderfully well if it's a brand new application with no legacy. But obviously that's not the case in the enterprise market. There are databases that you have to move data back and forth with. There are identity systems you have to connect to. How do you do that? And so the big push, the top 3 vendors in the back end of the service space are now moving into the enterprise in a production quality environment. And the way we've done it is, at least in Kinvey's case, we've got this thing called data links and auth links. And it's essentially a bridge into your existing backend systems. It mobilizes it, connects it to Kinvey, and ties it down to our libraries. So if you want to move data, for example, from an Oracle system, your DBA would create a SQL view or a bunch of SQL views that exposes which pieces of data you want to move back and forth for your mobile application. Or he may write a few new stored procedures if his religion is stored procedures and not SQL views. And the data link connects into those views or connects into those stored procedures through a data dictionary and translates them into a RESTful interface and converts SQL data into JSON and wires it down to Kinvey. If you've got a JBoss server or a WebLogic server and it's a SOAP API, then the data link is also a Java app. So you provision it into the middleware container and you tell it which SOAP APIs to connect to. In many cases, people actually write custom SOAP APIs for that enterprise system. And it wires into the SOAP API by reading the WSDL, translates the SOAP API into REST and JSON, connects it to Kinvey, and now it's available through the libraries. And the nice thing about this architecture is that the control point is still at your database or at your middleware layer. It's not on the client. You can turn it off, you can modify it, you can change the mapping any way you want. The application doesn't change. Because as long as the mapping remains consistent, you don't have to change the client-side app and update it on people's tablet and mobile devices again and again. The same model applies for authentication as well. Somebody tries to authenticate with Kinvey. You can set up Kinvey to say, well, authentication is not in-house, it's not within Kinvey, it's actually through a particular LDAP or Active Directory system. The call is routed to an auth link. The auth link connects to LDAP or connects to Active Directory, gets a SAML token, sends it back to the user, and the user then uses the token for every call from that point onwards. And again, the integration into the identity system happens at the backend layer, and so it's extremely configurable, and it's managed by the people that own those backend systems. The other piece of this puzzle is business logic. One of the big things that we've seen is people are building mobile applications that are now connecting to various systems, but when you have a new mobile app, you're now introducing a new business process. There's a very specific set of things that you want to enable to not only handle things like security and authorization, but also handle things like, when do I send information to a particular user? We talked about push notifications. When do I send a push notification to a user? For example, we have a large pharma using Kinvey for a field Salesforce automation tablet application. They have determined that it's too expensive to continue giving their field Salesforce laptops to go to the doctor and show the product catalogs. It's cheaper for them to buy tablets, in this case Android tablets, and in the end of year refresh cycle, not issue new laptops to the field Salesforce, but instead give them a Samsung Galaxy Tab. It's a quarter of the price. And they're going to put an application on it that connects to their CMS and connects to their Oracle CRM. And so now the salesperson has a blended view of the doctor's information from the CRM and the product catalogs from the CMS. And they're able to show a demo through a tablet application. The salespeople seem to love it in our tests because, according to them, it's a, quote, more personal experience with the doctor. It's not formal anymore because you're now sitting close to the doctor and you're leafing through a tablet. They actually prefer that interaction quite a bit. But what the customer also wants, what the company also wants to do is send push notifications to the salesperson when there's new content. They want to send push notifications to the salesperson based on what kind of things the doctor is prescribing so that they know what to talk about in the next meeting. They also send push notifications to the salesperson based on where they are in a given location. For example, you're in a particular location, there's a new doctor now that you can go visit this person. So there's a completely new set of business processes that are happening. So what the best backend as a service players have done is they've now started to compete with the platform as a service companies, and we've all now got mini PaaSes that goes with our BaaSes. So speaking of consolidation, the backend as a service companies are now launching PaaS infrastructure to run business logic. But interestingly enough, the platform as a service vendors do not have mobile offerings. In fact, a couple of weeks ago I was at Apps World, which is one of the largest independent mobile conferences that happens in Europe and in the US in San Francisco. There were 7 backend as a service companies in that conference, completely mobile focused, 7. Not one PaaS vendor in that entire conference. Why? Because if you go to their websites, they don't have a mobile offering. They're still telling you, you can come in, push from GitHub your code, and we will run it for you, right? They're solving the DevOps problem. They're not solving the mobile problem. And so time is going to tell on how backend as a service and platform as a service plays. I think we'll know in the next 24 months. But the reason I'm making this point is when you're thinking about your mobile strategy, you've got to ask yourself, where's your new business processes going to live, and how are you going to operate them? Because the BPM industry in its own is a massive market, and now mobile is adding a brand new business process layer on top of your entire BPM strategy. And finally, you see the small box at the rightmost point, which is most of us are now integrating with either mobile application management vendors or mobile device management vendors. In our case, we integrate with mobile application management vendors because when a new app is available in your enterprise app store, we detect that and we auto-version your backend, and you can tell us whether you want to force the user to update the application and not allow the previous version to connect to us or not. So we have that capability from a lifecycle perspective. If somebody is fired or if a device is lost, we can also turn off that auth token immediately so that nobody can access the backend system anymore. So these kinds of functionality is now coming into production. So when I look at the developer's perspective, the 3 big things that we enable for them that they don't have to think about is security, flexibility, and stability. So the entire backend now fully scales. The libraries are versioned, so there's a very stable way for them to build applications, and they don't have to update the app again and again because a lot of the logic now sits in the backend. And everything is managed securely end to end. The libraries take care of client-side security, and the backend is all HTTPS right up to the backend. But from a CIO's perspective, and I've talked to quite a few over the last 6 months, the power of self-service is starting to become evident. They want their developers to be able to go experiment and try without having to procure a lot of infrastructure or software upfront. It's essentially free to try. You just sign up and you go. And the second is, since it's cloud-based, the question we're trying to answer, and I'd love to get your feedback on this during the Q&A, is does backend as a service have to be on-prem or not? Because at the end of the day, your data is moving on a 3G or 4G network down to somebody's mobile and tablet device, right? So is it okay if the data takes an extra hop through a backend as a service layer, which essentially is mobile middleware, next generation mobile middleware, or does that backend as a service platform have to be on-prem? Okay. Someone has an answer.
Does that middle hop, does it persist?
This is a very good question. The answer is no. The data doesn't persist. It can, because funnily enough, right now it doesn't, so the answer is it doesn't today. But we now have a couple of new enterprise, a couple of our old enterprise customers who've now become familiar with the platform, so to speak, who are now saying, can we actually persist it because it improves performance? You don't have to keep coming back to me every time. There's some data that can persist. And so now we're adding functionality where that's configurable. For some apps, it's okay. For some apps, it shouldn't. But then, I think the previous speaker rightly pointed out, I think we also work with a few banks, and for them it's a non-starter. It doesn't matter. Everything has to sit on-prem, and I can't use public infrastructure. We'll see. But the first layer on top of the self-service capability, as well as the low total cost of ownership, I think the first layer that more and more CIOs and architects that we're talking to are extremely concerned about. And this is one of the reasons back into the service is stealing market share from the MeEPs, is that people want the flexibility to build cross-platform applications or native applications using any SDK of their choice. The entire MeEP strategy, which is about 5 years old and very successful. I mean, I'm not pushing back against MeEPs. Some of them are $40, $50 million companies on track to an IPO. It's very, very successful business. But the next generation of applications, the CIOs require the flexibility to say, if I'm going to build a native iOS app using a native SDK or a native Android app, or if I'm going to build a JavaScript-based application and use a phone gap or a trigger or an accelerator to wrap this and build hybrid apps against, I want that flexibility. And so any mobile strategy that you come up with has to give you the flexibility to write apps for the next OS and for the next form factor. That's very key. The second is you need to tie into various kinds of data depending on the use case. In some cases, it's only data that exists inside your firewall. In some cases, it's a blend. In some cases, it's all data that sits outside your firewall. So if you're building a pure B2C app for your retail business, then it could be completely driven by Facebook or completely driven by Twitter. The third is establishment of context. And like I mentioned before, context is not only the new business logic layer or the business process layer for your mobile application, but it's also authorizing who can access what and when. And so tying into your LDAP system or tying into your Active Directory system to create authorization rules per user is extremely critical. And then once the app is built, how do I distribute this application to my employees? And so the backend as a service providers enable the first box, because we all have libraries that let you run applications across the board on any device. We enable the second box to let you connect to any data or auth provider for identity, including our own. We enable the third box because we now all have PaaS layers and we let you run business logic and tie it into LDAP. But the fourth box is a market on its own, and that's the MDM and the MAM space. And so most vendors, BaaS vendors, are now partnering with either MDM vendors or MAM vendors to enable the fourth box. And we see that as the life cycle of mobile development. I mean, there's one layer below this with a whole lot more detail involved, but at the 10,000 foot level, we see this as the life cycle. But as you can imagine, each one of these layers is a company in its own. And so this is an updated version of the ecosystem map that Dave produced, and we maintain this on a quarterly basis. And as you've noticed, we've actually introduced the gray line, the MEEP line, because now MEEPs and BaaS are starting to compete on various accounts. And so we recognized that and said, let's start to identify the MEEPs. And so the reason this image is important for me personally is it gives me an understanding of what's going on in the ecosystem, right? So before there were smartphones, and I apologize that most of you can't read this, or rather read the companies, but you can Google for this, and this is available quite easily. Before there were smartphones, the entire mobile world was essentially the service provider who was providing you mobile service to let you make calls or send an SMS, and it was a handset vendor, and that's it. That was mobile. And then you had the smartphones, and they both moved to either corner of this chart, and a brand new ecosystem where each slice is a multi-billion-dollar industry in its own right started to emerge. On top of the service provider, there was infrastructure as a service that came about. And some of the service providers either acquired or started their own IaaS platforms. So, for example, Verizon acquired Terramark, and Terramark is now Verizon's infrastructure as a service platform. And then there was one layer above that, which is platform as a service. And companies like Red Hat and Oracle and IBM started creating their own PaaS platforms. And in some cases, people started acquiring into PaaS platforms. Salesforce launched Force.com, but then it went and acquired Heroku, and now they have 2 PaaS platforms. Right? From that side this way, on top of the OEMs, you had a bunch of mobile SDK companies that started to come about, and a lot of them have matured. And there's some interesting investments and acquisitions that have taken place. Red Hat, for example, and I'm picking on Red Hat because Gordon's here and he's taking copious notes, and he's going to take it back to people, and I'm going to get in trouble for this. But anyway, Red Hat invested in Appcelerator. They made a strategic investment because Appcelerator was a leader in mobile SDK at the time. Some companies, Google acquired Android, the operating system, and then the Android SDK came about. So Google is interesting because at the very bottom you see the Pac-Man going from left to right, and that's Google essentially acquiring its way all the way to the right, and now they're coming back this way and they're acquiring again. And companies like Apple, on the other hand, didn't follow the Pac-Man strategy. They followed the I'm going to build it myself strategy, so they have yellow lines going this way. But at the middle, in a very self-serving and selfish fashion, thank you, Dave, for pointing that out, I appreciate it, is back into the service, because we consider ourselves to be the glue that's bringing all this together and creating the right level of abstraction for mobile development. And of course, Kinvey is in the center of this universe, and we're one font size bigger than everybody else. But just one. But as you can see, and as has been pointed out, it's a very frothy space. There are about 25 startups. There are about 3 of us that have raised around $7 million, and the rest have raised either no money, and so they're struggling, or they've raised a little bit of money because they're fairly new. But there are about 25 startups in this company, in this space, and Microsoft is also competing with us. Microsoft is about a year and a half behind all of us, but they have their own service called Azure Mobile Services. Heroku recently launched a mobile offering about 2 months ago, and so now they're starting to compete. Because everyone has realized that to be successful in mobile, you can't be in the pipe business, you have to be in the water business, because it's all about data. It's all about identity. And so if you're in the pipe business, mobile developers will not use you because it's too costly and too consuming to build the back end. And so there is a lot of consolidation that's going to happen. There's an opportunity for 1 or 2 of these startups to become massive companies. Maybe Kinvey is going to be one of them, maybe not. But one of these companies is going to be the largest hub for mobile in the world. And they're going to hold a lot of data for a lot of new apps. They're also going to be the proxy layer for a lot of apps that are going to connect to existing backend systems. So it's going to be a combination of, I'm going to be the router and I'm going to be the storage layer. I'm going to be both. And this is a massive opportunity that's going to emerge in the next 2 or 3 years. And it's happening fast. A lot of us have tens of thousands of apps already on our platform. A lot of us are already touching 200 to 300 million devices every day. We've got one of the largest cloud platforms in the world. And this space is expanding like crazy, to the point where, selfishly again, it's amazing for me because on a weekly basis I see apps going live on Kinvey, and I'm astounded by the innovation. It's a sort of behind the scenes look into the next generation of applications, cool applications that are getting it built. That's all I had, and I will stop now and I will answer questions.
How do you scale that? I mean, those are big numbers. I mean, if you have that amount of stuff going through your system and there's platforms and so forth, what do you use to scale that?
Yeah, so we, to my knowledge, we're the only company in the space that actually lives across clouds. So we use Amazon, Windows Azure, even though they're a competitor, and Rackspace. And depending on, in some cases, we actually give the customer choice. In other words, which cloud are you comfortable staying in? But very few of them take that option. They just leave it up to us. So we're actually provisioning backends for our customers on different clouds, depending on where they're from, what kind of app they're trying to build, etc. And then each of those clouds live across regions. And then we distribute.
So their SDK doesn't care?
Yep, doesn't care at all. We do all of that in the back end. So one of the first few hires I made for this company was our VP of engineering was the head of architecture for Akamai's video delivery infrastructure. So a tenth of the internet goes through Akamai CDN. Ivan ran that entire operation from an architecture engineering standpoint. So he runs engineering for us. Morgan Bickel, our CTO, ran the second largest Oracle cluster in the world at IBM. Massive amounts of data flowing through that system. Two of our lead architects, one guy's from Raytheon, where they built missile systems for the US government. Another one's from Fidelity, who built trading platforms. So low latency applications. So it's a lot to do with the people.
Can I have one follow-up?
Please. No, please ask questions.
So if you have a failure at Amazon, do you have some kind of a
Yep.
failover strategy to one of those other?
Yep. Yeah, we've never been down. 2 years. Amazon's been down Amazon East has been down multiple times.
So you've actually tested your failover?
Yep. Well, in reality, because Amazon has also failed and we've never been down. So it happens in tests, but it also happens in reality where. So in other words, like we actually know when a lot of those clouds go down because we get alerts. And so one of the nice things about this architecture is, especially with our enterprise strategy, is it's easy for us to provision Kinvey now on a vCloud infrastructure, for example, through a click of a button. And so we're not in the on-prem space yet. But we're trying to figure out if we should be or not. Yep.
Your failover, that's not across heterogeneous.
It's not. That's right.
It's regional.
Cross-region within one cloud. Yep.
And the other question is what's your dev stack?
So we're cross-platform libraries built in the native SDK for the library layer. Our middleware layer is all Node.js. So one of the reasons we're able to provision really quickly is it's all a Node.js thin middleware layer. The backend layer is MongoDB for people that want NoSQL databases, and Postgres for people that want SQL databases. And then the data links are all, and auth links are all Java, because we found that for the enterprise use case, it's the most common container that's easy to provision for enterprises really quickly. And then at an infrastructure layer, Amazon, Rackspace, and Windows Azure. Yep.
So if you've got an existing application and it's been humming along, and now you want to add mobile to it,
Mm-hmm.
You got the issue of your user login
Mm-hmm.
issues. What would you recommend in that situation? Or somebody wants to now use, let's just use Kinvey's example.
Yeah. So so let's say you're doing LDAP as your authentication system.
Well, let's just say it's simple. It's just an MS, some sort of SQL server or SQL, and that's it.
So you don't have any user login? It's completely open.
Just as it's like a consumer app.
Yep.
So
Okay.
I'm just trying to think of a very simple use case
Yep.
where they're already they have their own
Sure. Database. Yep.
And they're using that for
Yep.
login.
Yep. So if you have your own server, database server, you would take our data link, and we've got data links for Oracle, for MySQL. We don't have one for SQL Server, but it's pretty straightforward to migrate a MySQL data link to SQL Server. And you would provide the data dictionary for that database that you want to expose for the mobile use case. So the data dictionary can either be which stored procedures you want to call and what the username and password is to connect to those stored procedures, or a view, or directly SQL calls. Once you provide that data dictionary to the data link, The data link then reads it. You run the data link. It reads it, connects to the database, verifies that what you have defined in the dictionary works. And it, on the other side, it auto-generates a RESTful interface that moves data on using JSON. It registers with Kinvey under your account credentials and says, this is a backend, external backend, that is now mobile enabled down to the library. And so when the library then queries your Kinvey backend, these new collections, we call them collections, are shown to the library, and the library can query either CRUD calls or complex queries against your Kinvey collection.
Now, I'm asking this question because I'm assuming that for another chart you had, like an authentication or something service, one of your first charts. Yeah, user management.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably already have some user management
Yes.
kind of functionality, but if their user management actual
Yep.
data exists somewhere else,
Yep.
is there a way of connecting those
Yes.
two together, or do you kind of have to build your own?
Yeah, so user management happens at two levels. So one is if you have no user management, then you use us and standard username password model, and we issue a token, and that's what's used to authenticate the session. If you already have a user management system that you would prefer, and the two we support are any OAuth system, so we support multiple OAuth. So you can build an app that uses Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google, of your choice. And what we do is we wire it directly into all their OAuth systems. And so a user logs in on the device with their OAuth credentials, gets it from that provider, sends it to us. Then we on the back end go and authenticate it with that system, make sure it's a valid token, and only then provide the user access to the back end. The same model happens for LDAP as well. So the end user authenticates with the LDAP system, provides us with the token. We then go connect through our auth link to that LDAP system, validate the token, and then provide access from that point onwards.
Is that user experience anything different than it would if they were just using your own user management?
Well, the only difference is a new page shows up for login. So in an OAuth provider, for example, if you click on the login via Facebook button, you get the callback where you log in on a Facebook page. And then once the callback is done, it then provides access back to the application. Same thing in LDAP's case, you don't have the callback. In LDAP, the app directly connects to the LDAP server, gets the username, gets the token from the server, and then provides it to us.
Okay, and that does not have the actual stuff, the actual paper?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
In LDAP's case, it's direct to the LDAP server, yeah.
Just following up on that, where's that? You store that token? Like in LDAP's case, you store it either in the back end or basically store it on the device?
So again, that's configurable. So what we've done there is the application developer can choose whether they would like the token to be replicated on the back end and the device or only the device. And the reason we have that capability is in many cases when you're writing business logic custom to the application, you need access to the token to make queries on behalf of the user. And so in that case, the tokens are stored in the back end. Otherwise, the tokens are only stored on the client and sent as part of every request.
Are they actually stored in the back end or encrypted?
If they're stored in the back end, everything is encrypted. All user information is encrypted. So including, for example, in the OAuth case, a developer can configure, apart from the token, what additional pieces of information you want to pull about the user. So for example, in Facebook, somebody logs in via Facebook, I would like to query this person's name, email address, perhaps his or her photograph, and store it in the back end for future use. All that is also encrypted.
Is that a shared key?
It's a private key for that developer alone. Yeah, we don't have, it's auto-generated just for that back end, yeah. Yep.
Responding to your question that you posed to us earlier.
On-premise.
On-premise, I'd love to see an on-premise option.
But would you want only an on-premise option? Okay.
I want the option.
You want the option.
To be able to take it to my CFO and say, hey, we have an on-premise option, this is what it's going to cost, and here's the alternative. But to have the option.
And the reason, can you give me some advice on why that is important?
It's culture.
It's culture. Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Hosted though, be hosted, managed. That way you don't have to have a footprint for it.
That'd be another option.
So that's a sort of a middle option, which is a dedicated cloud instance of Kinvey that perhaps is running on your Amazon virtual private cloud. So it's not on-prem in that sense, but it's still part of your DMZ. Okay.
I would say that would be the ideal scenario: a public cloud, private cloud, on-premise. You may never go off-premise,
Mm-hmm.
but I think having that option is a tremendous comfort for an enterprise.
Yep.
It's a conversation starter.
Yeah.
Your concern is what, multi-tenancy?
It's not my concern. It's their
I was just asking.
Yes, it is a cultural tendency. It's outside of these versions.
Yeah. So.
We certainly ran into that with OpenShift has is, a lot of interest in how easy it was to develop applications but so many people just told it was a non-starter unless, and we use the on-premise term very loose. We don't necessarily need in our own data center, but under, on dedicated machines that we have complete control over.
Yeah. So this is a good point. This tenancy issue is a good point. So, just so that we're clear, all back-end as a service providers are multi-tenant platforms. So everybody's backends coexist in some fashion or the other. It is all sandboxed. But from a deployment standpoint, it is a completely multi-tenant environment.
Well, multi-tenant in terms of the physical resources.
Yep.
Not necessarily multi-tenant in terms of data resources.
That's correct. Yeah, the data is all sandboxed, but the infrastructure is common. Physical infrastructure is common.
Okay, we have to wrap it up.
Cool.
So I'd like to thank Sravish
Thank you.
for his presentation. Thank you very much. And we're going to move right along. John, why don't you come on up and get started? So next up, John Garland from Wintellect. He's consulting. Now, we are one of those companies that does focus on the Microsoft side of things. And I was particularly interested in this because of the fact that Microsoft provides infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and now we could call this perhaps back-end as a service. So maybe while John's talking and demonstrating how this works, you can also kind of share with us maybe where these overlap. I'll leave that up to you, though. Okay.
Okay.
I'm not going to throw that on you just on the fly like this. But anyway, is everything working?
Let us see.
Almost there. Let's get on the screen.
Whoopsie. And let's font all that up. There we go. So we'll use this as a starting point and adjust on the fly.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll turn it over to John to continue to further introduce himself and explain the rest of his talk. Thank you.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's going to be a very interesting talk. I wasn't familiar with Kinvey before, but I plan on getting familiar with it after this. My name is John Garland. As Dave said, I'm a senior consultant with Wintellect. I'm a nuts and bolts guy. I'll qualify myself. Having seen the previous presentation, I'm not much of a business guy, but if you do have questions, I'll try and answer as best I can, and we'll see where we go from there. This presentation is one that I've given aimed at developers for how to use this new Azure Mobile Services to augment client applications, particularly mobile client applications. Let's see, shameless self-promotion. I do have a free ebook coming out in the next couple of weeks under the Syncfusion Succinctly moniker. We said everybody gets one for free, so you can't beat the price there. But focused on the nuts and bolts of developing Windows 8 applications. What we'll go over today, just to give a high-level overview of what Azure Mobile Services is and where it attempts to sit in the market, and then go over some of its capabilities, including how it handles data management and server-side business logic scripting, what provisions it offers for authentication and authorization, how it goes ahead and deals with push notifications. It has recently added a new feature for running cron-style jobs, a scheduler. And then along the way mostly, but we'll take a quick peek at the very end, about what its story is for diagnostics and scale. So why Azure Mobile Services? And it's interesting, as I heard the conversation earlier, about all the different ways that you can slice this big cloud thing that we've started to experience over the last couple of years. Azure Mobile Services actually, I feel, sits in a very different space than Kinvey, because it doesn't necessarily target, of course the folks at Microsoft might not want to hear me say this, but it doesn't necessarily target the business mobile developer. It's targeting the hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of independent, small, I don't want to call them hobbyist developers because that marginalizes them a little bit, but it is a small developer who's interested in writing an app. They've got an idea for an app, but they want to put a cloud on the back end of it to augment it. So along those lines, and thinking about where, and trying to illustrate where this sits, okay, so we're interested in publishing an application, and we want to connect it to the cloud. We want to get some of this cloud juice out of our application. Great. Let's think about a couple of questions we have to answer first. If we're using Azure or other similar types of stacks, well, is it infrastructure as a service or platform as a service kind of cloud that we're interested in? Are we looking for websites, web roles? How big does the back end need to be there? Well, then once we made that decision, what web technology are we interested in putting behind it? ASP.NET, MVC, PHP, what kind of a back end, REST, SOAP, what kind of authentication are we interested in? Are we looking to do some kind of federated authentication or some kind of independent authentication? Our cloud is getting a little bit bigger and our app is getting a little bit smaller. Well, now we got to worry about what kind of storage we want to work with. Are we looking for, what kind of queues, what kind of tables or blobs, or are we going to put SQL on the back end of it? The cloud is getting a lot bigger and the app is getting a lot smaller. Oh, and by the way, virtual network concerns, reaching back into on-premises. Now we've got a really, really big cloud project with a little app that we can worry about. And that isn't where we started, and that isn't where a lot of the developers who are interested in this particular cloud service want to go. So what is Azure Mobile Services? What does it provide? It has stories for data, and we'll take a look at, backed by a database, primarily a table interface point of view. Back-end business logic, server-side logic, authentication and authorization in a compartmentalized form. It isn't the smorgasbord of authentication and authorization options. Notifications. It provides notifications across several of the platforms. I mentioned scheduling. They've tied into a few interesting messaging services, so they work with Twilio and SendGrid on the back end. And again, the logging, diagnostics, and scale. Who are they targeting? Where are they available? Right now, they have SDKs for the Windows Store, Windows 8 apps, Metro apps, depending on what you want to call them today, Windows Phone 8, iOS, and Android. The whole thing is fronted by a REST API, so all of these SDKs literally just wrap the REST API, and the SDK, the code for all of these SDKs, is available for consumption on Git. So it's been published and it's available for people to look at. So I imagine if they don't roll out a BlackBerry version soon, if somebody's interested in the BlackBerry 10, they can probably just take a look at the Git versions of these other SDKs and roll their own in order to move into that platform space. And the scenarios, I kind of described up ahead. We want to get to this low deployment, low friction, low cost. I just want a bit of a back end to support the application where my application is the main focus of what I'm doing here. And rapid development by trying to embrace technologies that people are familiar with in those spaces. So to kind of take a quick trip around the neighborhood here, looking at mobile services, they've put up, when you provision a mobile service, all it is, you go into the Azure portal, select a new mobile service, elect to create it, provide a URL for it, so blah, blah, blah.azuremobile.net. You can choose to use an existing SQL Server database instance that's managed, a Windows Azure SQL Server database, or you can provision your own as part of this, provision a new one. But it is backed by a SQL Server database, which has a subscription, and where do you want the data center to be? Oh, that's interesting. If we have firewall issues, it could be the most Betty Crocker demo I've given in a long time. But anyway, so you've got those options when you go ahead and you provision your mobile service. Once it's provisioned, you get this nice little dashboard that gives you, the front page gives you a nice little set of options for, hey, if you want to get started and create an application, here's where you get the tools, here's the SDK, here's some, basically a walkthrough sample for getting started and a walkthrough sample code in order to look and see how you go about using this. So all the plumbing is in one place. And again, they've got the Windows Store, Windows Phone, iOS, and Android versions of all of that up here as well. So you can see how you go about making all that happen. You've got the dashboard for monitoring performance. Nothing fancy here. If you've seen Azure before, you've kind of seen all of this. Although it'll be interesting to see if this thing resolves or if we have networking issues. Well, we'll just keep on moving and we'll see where we get.
Were you able to log in on the other regular pages?
Log in on the regular pages.
Oh, just through your browser?
Yeah, I mean, I was able to use a browser, and I'm looking at Azure here, but either that or maybe the next thing I'll do is I'll take a look at the Azure heartbeat page to see how we're doing today.
It wouldn't let me in through a VPN. It wouldn't let me pull a VPN outside.
Yeah, VPN is blocked.
Okay, we're going to go for Plan B here. We're going to go, pardon me a second as I vamp a little bit here. Let's see how many bars I've got. Okay, so okay, there we go. Let's see, pardon me as I see what I can do to get myself a network connection here. Okay, so we'll see if we can do this over a telephone. Who said they're for phone calls? Okay, so actually, yeah, so we're going to use the phone today. This will be a first for me. So, abbreviating that particular tour, but bottom line is you've got the little tabs up there that you can use to configure various things. In fact, actually, I will go back to it. Pardon me as I put my feet back under me here. The one thing that I have done here on this particular one, I've provisioned it fairly clean, except for one thing. I have loaded a new table into it. And I was able to use SQL Server, regular SQL Server management tools, in particular this one, the SQL Server import-export tool, to take my own little comma-separated file and jack that data right up into here for me. So again, for the small developer, take your data, shove it on up there, fantastic, you're good to go. So I've got this nice little handy demo file here that just happens to be the NFL football schedule from the previous season. I'm a bit of a sports nut, so we're going to be going there today. So what's the story with structured storage in Azure Mobile Services? Like I said, it's backed by a SQL database. You can manage your data either through the Azure Management Portal, through the SQL Portal, which is Silverlight-based. The Management Portal is distinguished because it's the new fangled HTML-based one. You can use your SQL Server Management Studio. There's a REST API, etc. But it is a SQL Server database that you can manipulate up there. The one caution I'll throw out to that statement is, because there is this idea of front-end business logic scripts in front of these tables, if you do go in through the back door to directly access or manipulate the data, you will be taking a sidestep around those scripts and that particular business logic. Again, but it's great for setting up data or for downloading data to see what's going on or for the other uses. But for using the applications, make sure you go through the front door. You can actually, in terms of cost, you can reuse a single SQL Server instance, Azure SQL Server instance, across multiple of these mobile service applications. Oh, by the way, you get to provision 10 of these mobile application services free of charge. The only thing you pay for is the database on the back end. So you may be inclined to share one of these mobile services, one of these mobile service databases across multiple. And the way they manage that is just the database tables are simply schema per application name. It's just a simple way of dividing it up. How do you interact with the tables? Well, it's actually fairly simple. Just a simple declare the client that you have access to, give it the site name. You can give it an application key. There's roaring debate right now as to whether or not this application key should be completely removed. I think the closest they're going to be able to get in the Microsoft team is probably to put huge comments in the samples that says, don't use this stupid thing. The application key offers no security. It's in your application's being delivered to the world. How long is it going to take someone to decompile that thing and extract the key? It really is not meant for security. There's other provisions for security. It's not entirely necessary. So I'll caution that there, and you'll see the demos that I do. I don't use that thing just because it really serves no major purpose, in my opinion. From your code, you get the benefit of being able to strongly type your data if you're so inclined. And within then, you can go ahead and provide mappings. Either the table name has to take the name of either the class name has to take the name of the table that you're provisioning in the cloud, or you can alias it out with by declaring the attribute there. Same with the column names. If you have a name on the server you'd like to use and a name on the client you can use, fantastic. Once you're done with all that, you can just go ahead and instruct the client to get the table, and you've got the table. From that table instance, you can go ahead and issue queries. So the queries include where clauses, skips and takes, orders and thens. They have provided us this handy little lookup async, so you can request a single item by ID, because that's just an essentially common thing that people do. But also you get the typical CRUD operations, your inserts, your updates, your deletes, in addition to your query. A nice thing, a handy thing that they've given us on the inserts is once I've inserted a new item, because the tables, when they're provisioned, automatically provide an ID column, and it's an incrementing ID column. Once the item is inserted, when this operation concludes and comes on back, it does return with the new ID hydrated in the object. So you can see what ID it took when it went on up to the server. So you don't have to take a wild guess as to what that might have been. Oh, by the way, just plain JSON also works from within the client application. So you can declare a JSON object, provide key value pairs, and send that with a string-based table name and send that right on up to the server. Once the data gets to the server, as I mentioned, you have the ability to do server logic, so server-side business logic. For each table that's generated, there's a REST API generated up there. The tables have this notion of dynamic schema. And what does that mean? When it's an on-off switch that you can set on or turn off, obviously. But what happens there is, as data comes into the server, the tables that you've created will have columns added to them dynamically based on the data that's coming in if it's turned on. So you can either pre-set your schema up on the server and turn this off, or turn it on, do your work, watch the columns come in, and the magic happen. And then it's also your option, okay, well, it's time to go live. We'll turn auto-generate, turn the dynamic schema off, and things are already set. The sand is already settled. You're good to go at that point. You don't have to deal with the dynamic thing anymore. So for the casual developer, I've got to find the right word for those developers, but it's a handy way of doing this, a low friction way of doing this, in order so that they don't have to worry about getting all those nuts and bolts lined up ahead of time. The server logic. You get to write server scripts that intercept the typical CRUD operations. So, taking a step ahead and looking at that, basically it's all JavaScript that you write on the server side. There is a strong attachment to Node.js up there. I don't know if they've officially come out and said that the thing is backed by Node, but all indications are that this thing is backed by Node. You get your insert, update, delete, and read operations. And within those operations, the objects that come in, you can actually act on them before they make their way to the back end. So you get a query object for reads. You can actually augment that query or check that query before it gets issued. Updates, you can look at the items. Deletes, you could actually intercept a delete and look at the properties of the user coming in as to whether or not it should be a real delete or a hide. All those things you have the option of doing up there on the server side. A typical server scripting function might look something like this, where you actually have the ability to act on logging. You can say, hey, if this request is an authenticated request, let's go ahead and peel off the user ID and add it to a user ID. And because this is JavaScript, this is JSON objects, that object doesn't have to exist in the schema version that lives on the client. So the user ID, the notion of user ID, can be a strictly server-side issue. And then you can also apply, again, business logic. In this case, some trivial logic saying, hey, the price has got to be numeric and it's got to be non-negative, or it must be a positive number. You can check that, and if it doesn't validate, go ahead and send a failure back to the client. As you're concluding this logic, you've got to issue, you've got to conclude these things with either respond or execute calls in order to properly close out the request. Execute just says, now I've done everything I'm going to do to you, continue on your merry way. What are some of the things we get on the server side to help us with this scripting? Well, we saw console, which is useful for logging. There's a tables object we get at up there that allows us the opportunity to interact with our other tables, so our business logic can span into our other logical entities. There's an MS SQL object that lets us issue transact SQL queries. We'll see that a little bit later in the demo. But we can actually write real transact SQL and run queries, joins, etc. as part of our business logic. Let's see, push notifications. I gather that's been a topic throughout the day, but yes, there are tools in there to build up and send push notifications. We can make general purpose HTTP requests to tap into other services. There's a variety of status codes that you can return that are enumerated for your convenience. You can actually bring in an Azure object that allows you to tap into other Azure services. A great example of this is blob storage. So if you're interested in pushing images on up, you're not going to store the images in this SQL Server database. But what you can do is use some kind of a valet pattern to query Azure for a shared access signature key to go ahead and say, okay, here's the destination on which to update the image, and here's the URL that the image goes into. And you can complement the two services with each other. And as I mentioned, they form partnerships with SendGrid for sending emails as part of this service, or Twilio to send SMS messages. The type mappings, again, they keep it very simple. Any numeric value coming in across the JavaScript objects are mapped to floats. Booleans go to bits, date times, and strings are all supported. So, having talked about this a little bit, let's actually see some of this happening. And again, I want to make sure I'm talking to the right audience here. So, I mean, do you guys want to see the build, or do you guys want to see the Betty Crocker pull it out of the oven?
Can I ask a couple questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so just in that previous slide, one was on push notifications, the second was on the blob storage.
Yep.
The push notifications, is this something that Azure is providing some of the mobile SDKs you don't need to use, like Urban Airship?
Not being familiar with Urban Airship, but what it does provide is it provides an object model for interacting with Windows 8 notifications, Windows Phone notifications, Apple Push Notification Service, and Google Cloud Notification Service. So there are objects for building and sending the push notifications to each of those. There's a slide a little bit later. I'll jump ahead a little bit. There's another new service that's being debuted in Azure. It's publicly available now, but it's very, very early, very much in its infancy. Only supports, I believe, Apple and Windows 8 at the moment. I'll look at the slide to tell you for sure. Called Notification Hubs. And that's taking a slightly different approach to push notifications. It's further abstracting it. It's not only for consumptions by mobile, but also starts to get into the idea of maybe the mobile apps would like to register how they would directly like to receive the notifications rather than have it pushed from the top. And there are provisions in there for fill in the string kind of thing. So it expands out a little bit more and provides, again, another level surface there. So there's this. But there's also this other thing that's emerging, and I don't think one replaces the other. I think they're complementary in terms of different levels at which they act.
Is second question was on the data and the blob storage.
Yes, sir.
Maybe this is something you're going to cover later. Is on the client side, how are you handling? Are you basically facilitating both the data and the blob storage and handling them differently? And the data storage might be in JSON, maybe some abstracted,
Yeah.
index DB, but the blob might go onto the file system.
Yep. Well, it's important to note, there is, within mobile services, again, it's kind of a keep it simple approach. There's no direct support in the SDKs that they've published or whatnot for these other Azure nodes, like the blob storage node. But because the server here can go ahead and accept these requests, an attempt to push up some, or an interest in you as a coder to push up some of this, a blob, for example, an image, would likely be handled by a request to push up some data. The server-side business logic would then step in and say, okay, it's an image. So what I need to return this guy is I need to return him a shared access signature, and I need to go ahead and store maybe a URL or some other value. A lot of different ways you can handle it, but store something here. The client receives that shared access signature, goes ahead, and then on its own, up to its own devices with its own SDK, whether it's REST or what have you, would then push up the content to blob services. So it would reach outside of the currently defined SDK, the mobile services SDK at least, to do that.
Use the SDK to access the local file? Does it provide that level of abstraction?
No, the individual platform SDKs would be responsible for accessing the file, because the file might not be a file. And I'll use a great example is the camera might not, if you're taking something off a mobile camera, you're not getting it as a file, you're getting it as a stream. It might not be backed by physical storage yet. So who knows what it is that you're going to put up there. It's really in your hands to decide what you want to do with it. Yep. In the interest of time, I think I will actually cheat and Betty Crocker this a little bit so that nobody has to watch me actually code. And let's see.
I think that's fine. If we don't believe one of the things that you did, maybe we'll make you show us the code.
There we go. Yeah, so on the downside is we have to wait for Visual Studio to come on up here. But the general idea here, and actually I am going to, sorry, when you go off script, you tend to do a few things like this, but we'll go over here and we'll take a look at notification, subscription, ticket purchase. So in this case, I was going to add a new table. And in adding the new table, I'll go ahead, and there shouldn't be any columns. But of course there are, because I've already played with this one a little bit. But the general idea is that if there aren't any columns, what do? Well, the first thing is I add the table, and it will give me the table is defined by just with an ID. No properties on it, what have you. I can just simply add the business logic. They've provided a little bit of IntelliSense up in the web-based JavaScript editor for the developers. But in this case, I'm basically saying, hey, if this is an authenticated request, I'm going to append in a user ID. And in that way, I've got the idea of who made this particular ticket purchase. In this app, I want to let people buy tickets, for example. I want to make sure that they've purchased at least one ticket, so I'm applying some kind of business logic up here. And if someone is going to go ahead and request information about these tickets, assuming they've authenticated, and I've indicated that authentication is required for this table, let's go ahead and make sure they can only see their own tickets and they can't see their neighbors. Very lightweight, very simple. How do you do permissions? Per table, you can configure whether or not you're going to allow everyone in, whether or not you're only going to allow the application key, which I indicated a minute ago is really not terribly secure. You've got where you can restrict to authenticated users, and you can restrict down to scripts and admins, so only back-end services. Scripts and admins might be valuable for a delete scenario where you don't want to let API users to really delete, but administratively you may have a reason to go ahead and actually delete data. And one of a countless other number of reasons why you might want to do that. As far as authentication is concerned and who your authentication providers are, oh, sorry. Now that the code is up, before I can start diving into authentication, let's go ahead and take a look at
ticket purchases. Okay, so we saw the example that I gave with the tables and declaring the table type, but in this case, my table isn't defined. I'm just defining JSON objects and sending them up. So dynamically, I'm sending objects on up to the cloud and then retrieving and letting the cloud figure out how to provision the storage for them. Like I said, when this actually goes to production, I'd be likely to turn that off and assume that the dust of the application is settled, and then that way somebody can't dive into my REST API and do something funky. If I've authenticated it, it's much less of a concern. Whoop. Sorry, wrong page. Let's keep moving forward.
What did you just show? That was client side, right?
That was client side, yes. Sorry, and the web page was the server side. I can go into it in more detail. Don't want to cheat you, but I don't want to bore you either.
No, we can do it offline.
Okay. For authentication. Authentication and authorization is provided for Microsoft accounts, Twitter, Facebook, and Google. That's it. As I showed a second ago, you get table-level permissions on each CRUD operation across these four, and you can inspect the authenticated user on your way on in. Authentication, from a coding standpoint, is extremely easy. You take your client object, and you go ahead, and you call login async, given the account type that you want to log in against. The individual SDKs are providing the UI, the REST, the OAuth API, and the intermediary page, and all of that for you. So you're not worried about that. That all happens behind the scenes as part of the SDK. On the server side, we went ahead and saw this. We were able to go ahead and say, okay, let's take the user ID and add him in, and let's take and only retrieve items based on the ID of the user that's requesting it. So taking a look at that code, I'm actually going to Betty Crocker this all the way to the end here, rather than go little piece by piece. So excuse me while I wait for Visual Studio here. Okay. So taking a look at logging in, like I said, the authentication piece is right up here. When this happens to be code for Windows Phone. When the user when the user enters the first page of the application, I'll go ahead and, as long as I haven't been here before, because there are a few different ways you can go ahead and enter this page, go ahead and authenticate async. That's it. That's your authentication check. And when you go ahead and run this, I've got to add a few. Actually, I'll make a change. Sorry, I got to get a name from the server before I go ahead and switch gears this hard. DNG Wintellect demo. We'll go ahead and give this a run. And hopefully, it's always dangerous when you go off script on these things, but hopefully we'll see something good here. I've launched the page. Just those 2 lines of code was all that it took. And now the device is, now we may have some VPN fun here, but the device is going to be reaching out to, oh, there we go, we've reached out to Twitter. And with any luck, we've now logged in and we've retrieved data on the server using that authentication. If I go ahead and the Bills Patriots was an interesting game. Let's buy a couple tickets to it. Well, first of all, if I select 0 tickets and try and make the purchase, the business logic on the server is going to go ahead and execute for me and tell me, no, you got a problem. If I go ahead and try and buy, let's say, 3 tickets to that game, it'll go ahead and make that purchase for me. And if I go on up to the server and take a look at my data, ticket purchases, sure enough, there's my purchase for that particular game with my user account associated next to it, having been pulled out of that script. So very, very little code in order to get this kind of functionality. Push notifications. I don't know the depth to which we've gone into push notifications so far today, but most of the platforms have the same general behavior. The application needs to contact some central service to say, give me something that the outside world can use to contact me. In the case of Windows Phone and Windows 8, it's actually a URI. For Apple and Android, I couldn't tell you for certain, but the general philosophy I understand is there. You need something that uniquely identifies this app on this device and that it's willing to receive notifications. At this point, your app knows it wants to receive notifications, but nobody else on the planet is really aware of that fact. Your service needs to be given this token, this identifier, this channel on which notifications will be issued. So that information needs to be uploaded, as well as some information about when should you be notified. If I'm registering with a weather application to receive weather application to receive severe weather alerts, I don't want to receive them for Arizona if I'm living in New Hampshire. So I want to provide a zip code, for example. For sports teams, maybe I want to receive information when my favorite sports team does something notable. So I'll provide that information along with the channel on which I'm to be notified up to my own back-end service. And I'll need to hold on to that. The back-end service, will need to hold on to that and use that in order to notify to issue the notifications when the key event happens. When that key event happens, the back-end service needs to be able to iterate over those channels and that metadata in order to decide who are the people who need to receive my notification. And then it needs to send the notifications. The notifications are actually, for the most part, not sent to the app. They're sent to the device. The device and the OS determine what to do with it at that point. In the case of things like toast notifications, where something needs to pop up regardless of what app you're running, your app might not even be running. So that the operating system, the phone, the device is actually responsible for fielding that. Windows Phone 8, it was a bit of a chore to receive notifications. You had to check to see by name if one was already issued, and if not, then you requested one by name. Once you got it, you could then go ahead and publish it on up. Windows 8, interestingly enough, it's a lot simpler, but they've got what's probably the longest single method name in any API I've ever seen. Technically, it's accurate, but wow. To send them from the server side, within your scripts, you need to call push. Then you need to choose what notification type you're sending, whether it's Windows, Apple, Google, or Windows Phone. And the API up on the server is tailored to each one. There's going to be subtle differences on each one. So, oh, by the way, when you're going ahead and registering with your service to say, I want notifications, you probably also need to include information about yourself to say, this is the kind of device I am. Again, it's slightly different. The phone uses MPNS, the Google uses GNS, Apple uses ANS, and Windows 8 uses WNS to trigger those notifications. And again, slightly different methods. There's a variety of different tile and toast options in Windows 8 where there aren't in Windows Phone, etc. This is one of the things that Notification Hub seeks to try and mitigate over time. Again, very, very early, just absolute preview, iOS and Windows 8 only. But the registration becomes a little more client-centric than server-centric, although there is some server brokering going on in there. I'm not going to dwell on this. I just wanted to give everybody a taste of it and let them know that it is there, it is happening, and it's going to be evolving over time. For the push notifications code, we can go back here to Visual Studio and take a look. And it so happens that I've added a button to my UI that allows me to register notifications. Normally, you don't do it through user interaction with your app. What you'll tend to do is you'll tend to do it automatically on app startup. And by the way, you probably want to do these registrations. It isn't just one and done. In the case of both Windows platforms, these channels actually do mutate over time, depending on restart events, battery events, all kinds of other things can cause small changes in these URLs to happen. So what you're going to want to do is when you relaunch your app, you'll want to take it, collect your notification, collect your updated channel and send it to the server. And then there's some logic you may need to do on the client side. It's not atypical to have to create some logic on the client side to optimize that so every time your app runs, you're not trying to do a write to the server that you may not need to do. Again, in this case, I've commented all that out, but the general idea is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to notify the server or let the server know that this is a GUID that I'm using for caching. Here's the URI, which you can use to issue my notification. I happen to be a phone, so use the push notification and go ahead and put it on up there. It's authenticated, so I just can write the server-side code that goes ahead and says, by the way, in order to track who this happens to be, just intercept it when they go ahead and try and provide the information. So in this case, if we look at the insert script, again, that typical line, oh, if this came in from an authenticated user, go ahead and stash the user ID. So when we run this app, let's come on over here and this will go ahead and reach out, send it on up to the server. And if I go and browse at my data up here on the server side, I can see, oh, okay, I now have somebody who has registered. Here's my really, really ugly channel URI. Yeah, goes all the way over there. So not very human readable, but it's a Microsoft notification, and it is tied to this person's account. Okay, so why is that interesting so far? I'm not going to send a notification quite yet. I'll do that in just a second. We've got this nice little scheduler that they've given us, which allows us to periodically run a script, one or more of these same scripts, but do it on a schedule rather than as a result of incoming or data updates. The schedule affinity is as listed here, minutes, hours, days, months. You can also go ahead and issue it on demand, either through the REST API or there's a UI for doing that. We'll see that UI here in a second. But for any one of a number of tasks that you may want to do on a periodic schedule. Again, sending notifications from the weather service might be something that, hey, tomorrow's going to be sunny. I don't know if you want to do that to your users, but it's an option. And looking at that, I'll go ahead on up here to my scheduler entry. I see I've already created one. This one isn't enabled. It's not set to run automatically. You can disable them, or and you can define them with whatever periodicity you want. This one I've only just defined to do run once, or, run on demand. And this one I'm doing some things for fun for the demo purchase. Basically, I'm saying, okay, for each owner, for each person who's registered, how many tickets have they bought? And again, we could extend this out to say how many tickets have they bought today. But how many tickets have they bought? And for each of them, I'm going to go ahead and look up his notification. I'm using SQL. I could use the tables directly, but I figured I wanted to illustrate actually using transact SQL statements. In this latter case, it's parameterized transact SQL statements. And it just iterates over, looks at what kind of notification to send, and then sends a push notification. So I've registered my push notification channel for my app. I've gone ahead and ordered some tickets. Let's run this script. And again, demo God's willing. Might be a bit of a stretch considering the networking hops that we're doing right here. Okay, it looks like the demo gods are going to be unkind to me today. Nonetheless, the push notification would normally come across the device and I would get the toast here. Because I'm running an emulator, which is actually a virtual machine on top of a machine where we're having VPN problems, blah, 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 I'm not holding my breath here. Okay. All this stuff I said we were going to look at earlier, I didn't, so we'll take a quick peek at what's afforded to us here in this area. For diagnostics, we've got the dashboard that will illustrate CPU usage and API call usage. For configuration, we can go with either, we can define what the database that we're going to use and whether our dynamic schema is on. For scaling, we can either choose our reserved instance or our shared instances. The shared instances are free. That just means that Microsoft is provisioning some number of VMs out there and sharing people across some kind of an IIS instance or something along those lines. Reserved, you get your own dedicated VM. Reserved is more expensive than shared, is where it comes down to. And then the size of the SQL database, the size cap you want to put on your SQL Server database. And then the logs, you get the logging that comes on up here. And you saw that in the business logic, we went ahead and wrote a log if somebody made a bad purchase, and it'll go ahead and take us back to the business logic where that occurred. So we can log some information. And for better or for worse, this JavaScript, that's how you, the old I got here is how you debug this JavaScript. For better or for worse. Let's see. So the pricing on this one. I mentioned the shared mode. Shared instances, you get up to 10 free, and you pay. You get a max of 165 meg of outbound data daily. Inbound data is free, and you pay for the SQL, the cost of maintaining the SQL Server database plus any data in excess of the 165. For the reserved mode, I said with the private virtual machine, you get actually up to 100 of these instances that you can create. You get the same 165 meg data cap applies with the excess charged. And I forget the exact pricing on that one. Right now, this thing is still in preview, so there is not an SLA in place. As it goes to live, they will attach an SLA to it. Actually, yeah, it's going to be a 3.9s SLA. The pricing on it. So for a typical free instance where you're staying within that data cap, that 165 meg data cap, the 10 instances, the 10 applications are free. The 100 meg SQL Server database costs $5 a month. The cost for this service to back end a small application is $5 a month. By the way, I don't work for Microsoft directly. So nobody will be able to hold them to what I've just told you today in terms of this cost. They do provide a pricing calculator up on the Azure site with a mobile services node in it where you can manipulate the sliders and see if I do this much data, that big of a size, what have you. These are the costs that we're looking at. I don't want to cost anybody their mortgage payment because I said $5 a month, so I want to be very careful about that. So again, we've taken a quick look at the data services afforded by mobile services, the server-side business logic you can write, the authentication provisions for Twitter, Google, Microsoft Live, and Facebook, the fact that you can issue notifications from this, the ability to execute scheduling jobs, the attachment to external services, and the diagnostic capabilities. Various resources for doing this. If you're interested in playing around with Azure, they do offer a 90-day free trial, aka MS Get Azure Trial. The Mobile Services Developer Portal is up there and available. This isn't just a side project that Microsoft is doing. The documentation, the API is fully documented within their MSDN library. This is a first-class citizen within the Azure and MSDN stack. They just this past week released NuGet packages for the client SDKs, so even easier to plug them into your application. And like I mentioned, the SDKs are also fully available in source code form up on GitHub. And with that, any other questions? Yes, sir?
What kind of offline or poor bandwidth support is there?
Yeah, no, again, because it's really meant, I don't know about because, but it targets kind of a very low-end type of space. There is no provision right now in the current incarnation of any kind of offline or caching services other than anything you might roll yourself within your applications.
John, I'm curious about that. There's at the beginning and just now again, you said this kind of targeting low-end kind of mobile apps. Is that based on observation or subjectively looking at it and say, well, this is only good for low end now? And is that the strategic vision?
Yeah, no, it's when this was announced and initially presented, the way that this evolved is the team had gone out, the Azure team had gone out and attended dozens of mobile development events and conferences and what have you. And we're trying to find out what barriers are mobile developers experiencing as they try and add cloud functionality to their apps. And more often than not, they found that it was smaller shop developers who were just facing these daunting enterprise scale clouds that were strata above what they were after. Now, could this be scaled to an enterprise? I don't see why not, depending on the particular needs. The classic consultant argument, it depends. Depending on the particular needs of that enterprise application, if you need to get something out quick, that again, where offline caching isn't maybe necessarily a priority, and those kinds of things, this will get you there really, really fast. But the initial targeting of it really has been focused at the smaller developer, the thousands, I can't even say thousands, tens if not hundreds of thousands of apps that are being published to these stores daily, over time, that may want to add cloud functionality. Again, we mentioned the games with the leaderboards, those kinds of things. Now, is it going to evolve to something bigger? I don't know directly, but I wouldn't be surprised. But as far as where it's at right now, that's kind of where it's at right now. Okay, well, thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Go out here without plugging something important. There we go.
Okay, thank you again, John from Wintellect. And so we got to see 3 presentations, one on kind of the enterprise kind of view of BYOD. We got to see a presentation on what backend as a service is, and then we got to see a little bit more of a demo of what it takes to build an application that would a mobile application. So we're gonna start wrapping this up, and we're not done yet. What I wanted to do at this point is just follow back up on that conversation we were having, and I think I'm going to propose that we even further follow up on this conversation as maybe a breakout session at CloudCamp to get sort of into the nitty-gritty about like where is that center of gravity happening within the enterprise as far as what's happening around what's pulling on your applications. Is it the data? Is it authentication? Is it customer data? Is it collaboration data where maybe you're working with other companies' data? I'm just curious about that, and it's more than just a mobile conversation. So I think maybe it makes sense to have that in the CloudCamp. But from the perspective of mobile itself, perhaps talking about the enterprise, what do you guys think? What's your kind of thoughts from watching these presentations and our conversation from earlier? Anybody?
You mean what? Which is going to win, consumer enterprise?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what is going to win. I'm not sure if it's consumer or enterprise or something else. Just where do you think that's headed? Yeah.
I mean, my input is that side of things, and my observation is more the go-to-market you have. All these companies chasing all the same customers, and you have the giants there at the table, the Microsoft, the HPs, and Bentley. How do they get to the customer, get visibility, engaged, and stand above all the other companies in their respective verticals? Kind of interesting to see how that will happen. Who will win and lose it, given the reality of so many startups and so much noise out there.
Yeah, and it just made me think of something. It was like, about 2 years ago? I can't remember how long ago, when Larry Ellison was kind of famous for saying, what is this cloud? The term is meaningless. This is all pointless. What are people talking about? I don't know what this means. And at the time, I was just kind of like, what are you talking about, man? You're crazy. Like, how can you just ignore this whole movement? I actually went back and watched that video again just about a week ago. And it's clear to me that a big company like Oracle, I mean, they make more money on CRM sales. I mean, they're a database company, but just on CRM sales, I think they make more money than Salesforce. Well, that's not so much a sure, because the marketing messaging out there is like Salesforce is winning everything, right? Like they're the big CRM play. But
they just bought our company, it's a good example.
Oh, okay, so you know this. Okay, that's right. Well, congratulations, by the way.
It's interesting, but the question is, CIO yourself, you might have 5 companies that know you, your birthday, your kid's first name, how much their spend is with you, right? I mean, how does a smaller, innovative digital company get your attention? You're surrounded by giants and technology.
Well, and what I was going to point out is that the marketing that we hear isn't necessarily reflective of reality. You hear so much about Salesforce, and yet, and by the way, my data is a little bit old, but as of a couple of years ago, Oracle, which is not a CRM company, they own a CRM product, but they are making more money off of CRM than Salesforce is. But you don't hear that. Like, that's not what you hear, at least, in the marketing message. And so my thought when Larry Ellison was talking about how this cloud, whatever, he was kind of poo-pooing the cloud, my thought was that it reminded me very much of Microsoft in the days of the browser, when the web browser first came out. Does anybody believe that he just had this one weekend when all of a sudden he thought to himself, oh wow, this internet's a big thing, and he wrote the memo and like Microsoft started steering the ship? It's kind of a famous story about how I don't believe for a second that he didn't have that on his radar. It's just that these big companies, they can't afford to tell their customers, oh yeah, soon we're going to shift, because it puts everyone on a holding pattern for spending money, right? So like these big companies are not going to tell you, oh yeah, next year we've got a cloud product. Like Larry Ellison probably knew, but he didn't want to waste, he didn't want to have all of his customers for a year holding off on purchasing stuff. You don't blame him for doing that. That doesn't, it's bad business to tell your customers to hold off. But the reason why I'm pointing this out is that I wonder if that's going on now. Like, are the big guys sitting there going, crap, at some point we're going to have to like make this switch? You think they're doing that?
Switch to mobile?
Well, just switch to authentication services outside of our internal systems. I wonder, is that, like, do they think that that's going to happen? Because they're clearly not going to tell us. Of course, companies like Salesforce are like, sure, that's going to happen. We're all going to do that, right? I'm just bringing this up as a point, and I think I'd like to even continue discussing this further maybe later, but is that what happens? I think it's a legitimate question that today enterprises would say no freaking way.
Well, I think what's interesting about Kinvey was that my perception prior to this was that it was really about consumer space, games and sports and things like that, and they're finding out the revenue. And when I looked at them earlier, I was like really wondering about that data flow from an enterprise. Are they going to be comfortable basically enabling some cache data to be stored in this middle tier for some little company, is it encrypted, is it not encrypted? And hearing that it may be acceptable for an enterprise to allow that data to flow through temporarily in part and have synchronization with all the nodes is telling me that maybe some of the same providers can service consumer as well as enterprise. And where does identity fit in there?
Well, identity is just part of it, but it to me it's a very telling sign, and yeah, yes, back there.
I'm going to respond to a diss to the game developer.
Okay.
Which I don't say with disrespect, but last year the entire Google Brain Trust, Apple Brain Trust produced $5 billion in mobile ad revenue. The free mobile game developers produced $7 billion in virtual goods purchases, and they did it by instrumenting their code so that they really understood what everybody was doing and figured out how to make it better with the maniacal zeal they've done. And where it ties in is go back to Oracle, where you've got you know, when you look at customer service, it's kind of like a sandwich. You've got a piece of bread, the customer, and on the bottom you've got a piece of bread, and that's called a service. And then in between you've got the person in the cubicle called a meat. And to build really good apps going forward, the enterprise guys have got to think like the game developers and take the meat out and let people self-service all this stuff as much as possible. So, you know, I think these things become incredibly important for experimentation and how you get these really, really phenomenal apps that give companies lots of efficiency.
Yeah, well, and I mean, maybe, you know, efficiency is clearly an important factor. So it could be yes.
One of the things that we've seen, we kind of run the billing and monetization on the back end of all these people that are writing these apps, creating these games for people to play.
And I'm sorry, what's that company?
Metro Tech.
Okay, right.
Yep. So
one of our sponsors, by the way.
We are a sponsor.
Yeah.
One of the things that we saw when you're talking about the game, which is really crucial, was how can we differentiate ourselves in the business? So they wanted to create a settlement model. You know, they obviously leaving that arbitrary, so I don't mess up any NDA, but they wanted to be able to settle with all these different people that could create a sword, create a shield, create, you know, different kind of coins that people can farm for. Right? So people pay for that with their mobile app. And then it runs through URLs, the payment gets cleared through the ACH, and everybody gets settled out. Well, that means where all kinds of developers can create stuff in their game. So all of a sudden, their game is way ahead of everybody else because they have a mobile way to monetize it. And so when you're thinking about this kind of stuff and how can you go to war with the bigger people, you know, you brought up earlier, how do you be more nimble? How do you be more flexible? How do you innovate?
So on that note, so my brother has a company that, and I don't think it was specifically said, but maybe the gamification where you're incentivized to do certain activities based on how the rules of the game or the application are built. You know, could there be cloud services in a way are not that unlike an item in a game, right? You could have a service which is push notifications. Well, it's not a game, but it's an activity that's happening within the application. I'm wondering, will we get to a point where you're rewarded for good work by getting, more cloud services points? I don't know. I'm actually fishing right now just for where this is all going.
Along that line, right, what a lot of people do is they come up with real creative ways to discount and back allocate what they charge for what you've done. Right? So as you do more or you use more, then they give you all these creative levels of discount. So it encourages that behavior. Right? So there's thresholds and stuff usually that they want in place, but that's what we've seen sometimes.
Maybe that's how we tease the enterprise out into the open by giving them more freebies or services if they use our cloud siren call services, right? I don't know. I'm definitely fishing at this point. Okay. Well, any other thoughts on that, on where this might go? Is how many of you, I mean, this is obviously a mobile cloud workshop. How many of you are actually doing mobile stuff? Okay. Definitely over half of you. Okay. All right, cool. So we are just a few minutes ahead of time. That's good, I suppose. So we are going to take a break. And let me just tell you what we're going to do. In about a half an hour, we'll start kind of the networking for the CloudCamp. I was actually thinking we might go a little bit over the 5 o'clock schedule. That's why we scheduled it for 5:30 to give ourselves some time. But we ended up actually on time. It's the first time for everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a break. If you are going to stick around for CloudCamp, we're going to start right at 6 o'clock. So you got an hour. The networking, like I said, will start at 5:30. Some people start showing up, and I think we're going to have some snacks and some drinks or something. And then we'll have some lightning talks. We are going to take the suggestions that a whole bunch of people made when they registered. We asked you to put down a topic that you were interested in. We have all of that in the email that we sent out to everyone that said, here's what we're going to talk about at the CloudCamp. I listed out the major categories. And so we will go back and revisit that. And we also have, like I said, we have lightning talks. We're going to take the categories that you're interested in, have breakout discussions focused around those. And then we'll do an unpanel as well, which is like a group question. So my guess is that the way CloudCamp will work tonight is the lightning talks will go from about 6 to 6:30. We'll do an unpanel until about 7. We'll do a breakout session. We'll probably do 1 round, maybe 2 rounds of breakout sessions, and we'll be done by around 8:30, just so those, if you wanted to kind of guess how the schedule will probably work. So I know it's a little bit of a long day if you're here for the whole day, but CloudCamps usually are pretty interesting because of all the questions that we get and the short, fast nature of the lightning talk. So I hope you'll stick around. But if not, thank you very much. And I'd like to one more time thank our speakers, who some of them had to go, but I want to thank them very much for giving us, sharing us their thoughts today. So thank you very much.